Among the tall trees of the dense forest, he confidently wedged the sword, sanding each movement to perfection. The sun's rays, breaking through the weave of the branch, illuminated his focused face. All the blows were accurate and verified, because they were endless hours of hard work. Feeling at the same time fatigue and pleasant pleasure from the completed workout, he took a deep breath. It's time to go home to be late for breakfast. It is worth recalling that he was already 15. So the time of the ceremony of majority approached. The guy changed himself. In the meantime, a grandmother with a touch of sadness in her voice noted that his parents would not be able to see this important moment in her son's life. Once upon a time, they were famous adventurers and reached platinum rank. However, after that, they disappeared under mysterious circumstances, fulfilling their first task. The guy firmly believes that when he becomes an adventurer, he will definitely find his parents and return them home to finally reunite the family. The mother, with tears in her eyes, remembered how early her husband, her beloved grandfather Ralph, died. The heart squeezed from the painful memories, and the tears slowly slipped on the cheeks. Sighing with gratitude, she looked at Ralph and mental. He dressed his best costume and promised confidently he would definitely reach the platinum level and make so much money so that his grandmother could finally enjoy his life. The grandmother, whose look was full of heat, thanked Ralph for his words and assured that his parents would be proud of him. She added that she sincerely believes in his ability and was convinced that he can master everything he needed to fulfill his dreams. Ralph easily kissed his grandmother in his cheek and said he had to go. Leaving the house, he moved to the majestic building that rose above the village. It was here that all residents gathered during the age of majority, knowing the importance of this place. On his way, he met a lot of peers who were enthusiastically shared about what skills they wanted to acquire. Some sought to become a sword master and reach the pinnacles of a blade, while others were determined to master magic and join the ranks of golden lions. One of the boys noted that such skills are subject to only the strongest, and not everyone would have a chance to become part of this elite. Suddenly, all those present at the ceremony were asked to pay attention to what was happening around. The old man in a black mantle, with a face that shone in ancient wisdom, slowly approached the altar and raised his hands to heaven. He unexpectedly announced that his true talent will open in the name of the goddess. The old man urged everyone to turn in the queue so that everyone could find out what the gift was staring. Among the group of teenagers, Gelt stood, embarrassed and eagerly. His heart was beating faster, and his thoughts were constantly returning to what was happening in front. He only had time to hear the old man declared, "One of the boys got the skill of arc." Around Ralph is increasingly loudly, the whole. Teenagers boasted new skills that had just mastered. One of them loudly announced that he learned to count and seems to be planning to become a merchant. This discovery allowed Ralph to look more at the world and understand the wealth of different skills that others have mastered. He often wondered what kind of skill he was destined to get. He dreamed of learning how to own a sword like his father, or to have the same strong body as his mother. Suddenly, the old man announced that Ralph's time had come from Adder, and a gesture invited him to go forward. The boy's heart was harder when he approached the magical sphere and carefully put his palm on her. The old man in the black mantle looked confused and acknowledged that he had not heard about that ability. Meanwhile, members of the company were going to carefully view the documents, trying to find any references to this new skill. It has come to him that this skill is completely new to him. A muffled noise immediately rose around. People were whispering, struck by his unexpected discovery. At that moment, the old man approached Shroff and reported that the ability to heal had never been manifested in this shrine. So what happened can really be considered an opening. People have been vividly discussing the news of the newly discovered, still unknown ability. The quiet whisper gradually changed to loud conversations, which only emphasized the significance of this event. Overflowing with joy and pride, Ralph hurried home. Breaking him into the house, he immediately began to call his grandmother and, shining with happiness, shared with her news about his new ability. The grandmother, who sat quietly in the corner, only quietly noted that she had guessed it for a long time. Confused, Ralph asked where she learned so quickly. Grandma explained to Ralph that this man expected his return all his life. The stranger was called Figuro, the head of the Golden Lions Guild. Hearing this name, Ralph could not hide his surprise. Without spending a minute, Figuro suggested that you immediately go to discuss the case. He insisted with belief that the ability to recover would be fully revealed, as Ralph became part of the Golden Lviv. The man assured him of his support, Despite the admiration of Ralph, the essence of his new talent remained a mystery to him. He never managed to activate this ability, which was why he felt confusion and inconvenience. The hero reassured him, emphasizing that Ralph only recently made his first steps in adulthood, and all his abilities, like the other, would be revealed with time. The senior leader promised Ralph that he would always take care of him, and noted that his grandmother would be happy if Ralph became part of their community. The guy looked at her grandmother, and she said with a warm smile that the decision was behind him. She also noted that parents would gladly support such a choice. Everyone understood. He had many trials and adventures before him, but he met them with full readiness. Thinking for a few seconds, he nodded strongly and asked Figaro with a respectful bow, with a request for custody. Figaro smiled warmly in response, stabbed his hand firmly, and assured that he would keep the word. He added that he genuinely believes in Ralph's ability, and is convinced that together they are able to achieve significant success. In a few months, Ralph worked with the members of the guild, helping to carry heavy boxes. One of the men, also a guild, was annoyed that there was no use of Ralph. Hearing such words, Ralph immediately grabbed the boxes and, apologizing, assured that he would do everything properly. Watching his efforts, they wondered how long Mr. Figaro would still leave Ralph next to him. At that moment, a girl named Arya approached him, addressed him as a Jido, and reported that the boss was waiting for Ralph in her office. Ralph went to Figaro's office and immediately heard the unexpected news. The leader decided to exclude him from the ranks of Golden Lions. This message stunned him, becoming a complete surprise. The hero confessed that for many months he was looking forward to at least some results from his recovery skills, but she remained inactive. In fact, Ralph has experienced many different ways, but none of them has been able to activate the skill. In the end, he returned to the usual responsibilities, hoping that he could still be useful for the guild. He also explained that, as Ralph is known, there is already a Gata with a sword and Arya with a magic vessel in the guild. For people like Ralph, who cannot help anything, there is no room. In addition, he noted that he was no longer able to protect him, because other members of the guild are already openly insisting on the same. Quickly realizing that it is worth waiting a little, he suggested that his ability may be activated only in certain circumstances. The hero stretched out Ralph's documents and explained that, because of his inability to use his skill, he has now to pay the guild the amount of compensation specified in papers for failure to comply with the conditions. Ralph looked at the document and began to read its content carefully. He personally realized that the amount of compensation was 5 million gardens. He strongly stated that he would not be able to collect such an amount, and Figaro suddenly suggested that Ralph would sell him his home, and then the rest of the debt could not be returned. Ralph was heard. He said that his grandmother lives in this house, so he wants to avoid any sale. Ralph noted that his parents can return, and if there is no one, he risks never to see them again. If sincerely asked Figaro, asking a little time, because he was convinced that he would find the opportunity to make money and repay the debt. Figaro just smiled in response and agreed to keep the IF in the house. Figaro suggested that Ralph try to join another guild of adventurers to make a little money. At the same time, he noted that it is unlikely that anyone would be glad to accept such as Ralph. A transparent hint. The most realistic way for him is to join the garbage collectors. Figaro persistently recommended this option. A year has passed since Ralphie was expelled from the Golden Lions Guild. Now he lived on the streets and earned himself the hard work of the garbage collector. The work was humiliating and exhausting, but he had no other way. Once, passing the city streets, Ralph noticed under his feet a small stone. Picking up the find, he realized that he was holding a magical crystal in his hand, which was barely noticeably shimmering in his palm. This crystal became the only prey this day. The earnings were so scanty that he barely raised the ends meet, not to mention the payment of interest and debt. Only ashes remained from all that he had. He looked at the crystal in his hand and inadvertently compared with this stone. Once he had a great power, but now he was forgotten and needed, just like he himself. After the expulsion from the Golden Lions, a year has passed, and since then, his gift of healing has been silent. The locals began to openly call him worthless. One of the guilds of the adventurers still agreed to accept it to their ranks, but instructed to perform the cheapest and most humble assignments, for example, to remove garbage on the streets. He tried to stay afloat to the last, but fate was ruthless. Their house was sold and the family remained in the open. For 6 months, he lost the only close person. His grandmother died because of a serious illness. This tragedy shook it deeply, leaving in a state of deep despair. He was not only destined to become a traveler, but also the promise he gave his own grandmother remained unfulfilled. Now he found himself in front of a deep pit that served as a place for garbage collection. His thoughts were constantly circling around his own worthlessness, and a strange, unnecessary gift to which his fate endowed him. It seemed that life turned to him into an endless chain of frustration and defeat. Deus, focusing on a pebble in his own palm, suddenly heard a cry that broke his silence. Leaving the world of gloomy thoughts, Ralph turned sharply and immediately realized the sound came from the depths of forest huts. On a small lawn, the girl desperately ordered the goblins not to approach, but they did not pay any attention to her words, and rapidly stuck forward. She was adamant, full of determination and confidence that was reflected on her face, despite the fact that there were much more opponents. Unexpectedly, having subjected to a strong inner impulse, Ralph jumped out of the bushes and stood between her and danger, seeking to protect her from the monsters. The heart pounded in his chest, but he persistently maintained external peace. He stood side by side, reflecting the onslaught of the goblins. Ralph looked at the girl with the edge of the eye, as if asking if everything is well with her. In response, she nodded briefly. In her view, gratitude and unwavering determination glowed at the same time. He was searched for a way out, because he had never had a goblins. Inside, it was a fear that prevented the act of decisive and jumped every movement. Looking at, he noticed 3 goblins, each of which had a threatening appearance. Full of confidence that he could cope with the situation, Ralph remembered how his father owned his sword. He was a real fencing master and trained his son every day. Following parental guidance, Ralph persistently honed his skills, dreaming of ever reaching the same level. Take a deep breath. He clenched the sword's arms even more firmly, accepted the fighting rack, and tried to hide his excitement. The goblins, fiercely growling and scraping the fangs, rushed to Ralph. He barely managed to erect a sword to repel their attack. Suddenly, he noticed how the blade of his sword cracked, and a sharp fragment of steel broke with a whistle towards the girl. Everything happened instantly. The girl, without fear and without even clutching, she strongly raised her hand, not looking away from the wreck that flew to her. The next moment, the wreckage seemed to explode, flying in small particles and settling on the ground. He looked at it in surprise, and without realizing what happened and how the girl managed to do so. He was already going to ask her a question when suddenly heard her cry, which warned of danger. He noticed Goblin nearby who jumped out of the shadow, swung his sword on him. In the last second, Ralph had time to bounce and, using the inertia of the enemy attack, hit him in his back. Goblin fell to the ground, defeated. The other 2 goblins, witnessing the death of their partner, froze for a moment. Fascinated by panic, the goblins ran deep into the forest, leaving Ralph and the girl alone in the middle of the lazy meadow. Turning his breath, he looked at the girl and immediately noticed her injury. On his hand there were scratches from which the blood oiled. Ralph was approaching, full of intention to find out if everything is fine for the girl. But she took a step back and asked him not to approach. He immediately apologized, assured that he only paid attention to her wound and sincerely wanted to help. The girl barely shook her head and explained that she had the ability to destroy. A simple touch of her hand can be deadly. He looked at her in surprise, trying to understand what he heard. He had not yet met such ability. Only now did he realize why his sword crumbled into pieces when she reached out. The girl lowered her eyes and barely nodded. Her hand destroys everything she touches, no matter how she wanted to. It was amazed by watching this incredible and devastating force. Carol looked at him and thanked him sincerely for his saving, introducing Elsa. Ralph smiled warmly and named his name. She apologized for excessive sharpness, confessing that she has not yet learned to control her own abilities. She noted that she did not intend to hurt her rescuer at all, but the only thing that helps her to restrain her abilities is the glove she holds in her hands. Ralph tried to reassure her, emphasizing that her strength saved her from a fragment of a sword. For the first time in a long time, Elsa smiled warmly and gratefully for his understanding. Slowly approaching the girl, he still couldn't believe that everything was behind. His consciousness swarmed from thoughts. In the end, overwhelming the hesitation, he asked how she found herself in such a dangerous place and why it was the goblins attacked. He only had time to speak when Ralph's gaze stopped on the collar on his neck. He did not notice him before. In the eyes of the guy, the surprise flashed, but he did not have time to say the word, because a sinister hiss came from the forest. A hunched and angry goblin suddenly appeared from the thickets. Ralph immediately warned everyone that another goblin had returned, instinctively lifted his sword, and immediately remembered that he had already been broken. With his sword, he rushed straight at Elsa. Ralph hurried forward, seeking to protect the girl. He grabbed her firmly and tried to jump away. Frightened, she exclaimed, suddenly realizing that he touched her hands. She warned him. Such an act can cost him life. Ralph realized that he could really disappear soon. His life was short, and it seems that this is how it will break, leaving no trace after himself. In his heart, a warm thought emerged unexpectedly. If he can become useful to someone, it will not be so bad. He commanded Elga to flee, preparing to meet his fate. But suddenly, an unusual echo sounded in the mind, and before his eyes, an inscription broke out about fulfilling the condition to activate the skill. His eyes were widely revealed from surprise. The value of what was said has not yet been reached. Meanwhile, she, realizing the true nature of her own destructive power, heard, perhaps with the advent of Ralph, her gift will receive a new face. The system asks if it is ready to activate the recovery skill. She confidently responded. Therefore, the system informed that the iron sword broke. Ralph read these words with surprise. The system wondered if he wanted to bring a legendary iron sword to life. After a short pause, he still agreed, and in his hands began to gradually take shape of the sword. Goblin stood up so close that Ralph instantly put a forward sword, which he recently found. The sword was effortlessly cut by Goblin in half, and his body swore on the ground. He stood over his body, still trying to understand what happened. She looked at Ralph with wide open and confused eyes, not believing that he dared to touch her hands and remained unharmed, despite her pernicious power. Ralph, without releasing her palms, tried embarrassed to comprehend what happened. With surprise and admiration, he cast his gaze on his sword, which resumed in amazing. It was on this day that the ability he still considered unnecessary, for the first time, made himself known. And it happened at a crucial moment. At the same time, he met a girl endowed with the power of destruction. For the first time, he really felt how powerful and significant his gift could be. Elsa, without her eyes from Ralph, suddenly asked if he was intended for her. Elsa's question jumped Ralph by surprise, and he looked at her with surprise. He tried to understand why these words were so struck. In her eyes, fear, hope, and despair were reflected, the feelings he recognized like no other. Ralph did not look at his sword, stunned by the incredible reincarnation of weapons. Now she sparkled, as if she had acquired a completely different nature. Elsa watched Ralph and realized that her touch did not harm him. She thought, he may be her chosen, those who are able to release her from the curse. With a sadness on her face and burden in her heart, she shared with Ralph the history of her life in the village. From an early age, she was considered a curse, the force of destruction she unconsciously brought, destroying everything she touched, condemning her to loneliness and alienation. He listened carefully, not looking, and trying to understand the seriousness of her position. He said that her mother died immediately after childbirth, becoming the first victim of this pernicious touch. Despite his daughter's boundless love, his father lost his hand one day as a result of her abilities. Subsequently, his life was destroyed by the disease, and after the death of his native person, Elsa remained alone in the world, which she was scared by both her and her all, the power. The villagers treated it as a natural disaster, and even Elsa herself could not blame them for that attitude. One day, a strange priest suddenly appeared in the village. He arrived for a special purpose, to find gloves for his father, who could hold her extraordinary abilities under control. In addition, the prophecy said, a day will come when a man is able to dispel her curse and stand up for her. It is he who will be able to convince others of her kindness and touch her without fear of death. The young man deeply impressed her story. He heard seemed incredible, and he could hardly believe it. He did not even suspect that her life was so marked by tragedy. When he asked if he really did not hear the same man, he mentioned the priest. Stunned by unexpected events, he still couldn't believe what happened. Turning to Elsa, he asked why she was traveling alone in the forest. The girl, lowering her eyes, quietly confessed that she was sent here as a slave. Last year, the crop failure forced the peasants to seek salvation. Without having a means of existence, they decided to give a girl accursed to slavery to the houses of Valsency and Ager in exchange for food. He is still trying to understand her story. He remembers the unexpected moment when the system suddenly appeared before him. He remembered how the system suggested to restore its broken iron sword, turning a simple weapon into a legendary artifact. At that moment, he realized that he, at first glance, was a futile ability to recover for the first time. His thoughts were raged and intertwined in the depths of consciousness, and with every minute he clearly understood that all the events experienced inevitably led him to this meeting with Elsa. Elsa, gifting him with a warm smile, noted that this was how their acquaintance began. In Ralph's memory, there was a long confidence and hope that they glowed in her eyes when she assured him that he considers him to be chosen. He looked at her. An unexpected combination of surprise and silent consent broke out in his soul. It seemed to him that it may be the fate that really brought them in this place. After exhaling, he acknowledged that his ability made himself known for the first time in his life. They sat on huge stones in the woods where trees were quietly talking around, and could not get rid of the thoughts of what had happened recently. Elsa felt the importance of this moment, and finally realized fate gave them a chance. The elves said that his gift remained undisclosed for a long time, and life complicated heavy debt. This is what led him to the forest, where he unexpectedly heard her calls for help. Elsa suggested with a slight surprise that it was probably the loneliness in this forest that caused their meeting. Suddenly, her gaze clarified, and she offered Ralph another attempt to apply the recovery skill. She showed a short sword that was lying on the ground and suggested that he test his abilities. At this point, a large orca began to approach them, which was accompanied by a whole flock of goblin. It is reluctant, but still giving consent, he reached out to the sword, focused, and tried to use his skill. However, nothing happened, and he could not understand why his power did not work. To cheer him up, she suggested trying again, reminding that last time everything was surprisingly good. Suddenly, Ralph appealed to Elsa to destroy a short sword, taking advantage of her destructive abilities. Seeing his surprise and perseverance, she hesitantly agreed. She barely touched the sword as he broke into small debris. The crumbs of weapons poured down, and the struck silence prevailed. Both were surprised and lost in the sword's wreckage. Noticing Ralph upset, Elsa decided to cheer him up. She reassured that it was not necessary to lose faith, because it was only the beginning of their journey. Suddenly turned to Elsa and without a moment, take her hand. It was at this moment that a systematic message came before his eyes. A broken short sword was found, and the system suggested that it restore it. Remembering the moment when they held their hands together, and Elsa destroyed something, Ralphie suddenly shone. Their joint actions are likely to become the key to activating his ability. He decided to see his guess. Do not restore things destroyed by her ability if they interact with each other. She looked at him distrustfully, obviously not accepting this opportunity. She had to hear about such ability for the first time. Before Rolf on the screen, a list of sword properties he could be created, from the simplest to the legendary. There were percentages near each quality, which probably indicated a chance of success. Rolf chose the usual level with 90% probability, deciding to start with the easiest option. In a moment, a new short sword was in their hands. Rolf did not hide the admiration. His assumption was correct. He carefully studied the characteristics of the weapon, which undoubtedly testified to the successful restoration of the sword. He finally realized why his ability did not give results before. If his assumption is true, then his strength does not manifest itself without the presence of Elsa. Squeezing this hand, it should be noted how well their skills complement each other. Their common force strengthened in it faith. Together they are able to become one. But suddenly the silence broke the barely visible steps that came from behind the trees. Seeing them, she burst into surprise. An angry orc, turning to Ralph, accused him of the death of his comrades and promised that he would now respond to it. He told Ralph that it was this orc named Kuhat that attacked their van. In persistently seeking to protect her, he appealed to Elsa loudly to retreat. However, she remained adamant and insisted on fighting with him. Annoyed with their dispute, he ordered to stop the altercation immediately. Without a moment, he rapidly rushed to the goblins, holding an extremely sharp and light sword in his hands. With each wave, Ralph's blade felt the weapon almost effortlessly cuts the flesh and bones of enemies, as if the air was cutting through. One by one, the goblins fell to his feet, not even having time to understand what was happening. The bloody splashes flew all the way, but Ralph did not stop, fully immersed in the battle. He could not believe his own eyes when he looked at the sword. The blade emitted the inner light filled with mysterious magical energy. The sharpness and lightness were impressed. He never knew such a sense of weapon. The sword seemed to direct his. The orca's gaze was fierce, hatred in the eyes, and the muscles were rolled under the skin, reminiscent of steel ropes. From this, Raoul had an icy cold, and fear instantly gave way to determination. There was nowhere to retreat. The orc waved a heavy. She rushed to Ralph, barely holding back tears of joy and relief that he remained unharmed. She confessed how much she was afraid of his life, and shared what his incredible joy was given to her by his victory in this terrible duel. The exhausted Ralph, relying on the sword, pointed to the fallen Alka, was convinced that it was he who directed the goblins, and ordered them to attack her trolley. Turning to Elsa, he turned his gaze to the fallen Alka and the body of the goblins that lay around. Anxiety flashed on his face. He asked that she was going to do next and suggested that her join his journey. Elsa sighed heavily, raised her hand, and pointed to the collar that clenched her neck. She said that this device is filled with powerful magic of detection. If at least someone tries to remove his force, the collar will explode and immediately breaks her life. She also noted that she would remain a slave waltzing until there is a magical artifact. At the same time, she had just met her elected, who had hope for salvation. After these words, Ralph suddenly shook his head. In his gaze, rage and unwavering determination broke out. He told her that the sword had a price of 3 million gardens and suggested that he use it to help her gain freedom. He said it was a gift from his father, their first jointly created work. Raoul felt her emotions, but at this moment the idea that suddenly had in his mind interrupted that moment. Elsa looked silently in the distance, plunging into her thoughts for a long time. Meanwhile, Ralph, understanding the seriousness of the situation, desperately asked her for help. In his words, he felt sincerity and despair, because he realized that he was not enough for his own strength. Finally, Elsa agreed and offered to start work immediately. Each time taking a scattered weapon, he carefully combined individual parts, focusing on restoring its integrity. Having spent a few hours in hard work, they dropped to the ground and sought the result. The restored blades, maces, and shields glittered with freshness. But Rolf sighed heavily, because there were no legendary artifacts among all these things. Fatigue and disappointment engulfed him. Confidence in the success of the trip began to melt. Suddenly, Elsa noticed on the ground a small crystal left behind by the goblins. She suggested destroying it using her abilities. At this point, the system reported the detection of the destroyed crystal and suggested that it be restored. Suddenly, Ralph swept a wave of powerful magical energy that pierced his whole body. He realized that he had gained a new experience to improve his skill and shared it with Elsa. Amazed at the hard, Elsa confessed that she was heard for the first time about the possibility of raising the level of skills. Exploring the information in the system, he noticed that his regeneration skill has risen to the 2nd level, and the chance of successful action increased by 1% more. The guy realized that with every increase in the level he acquires, destroying the monsters, new opportunities are opened. Each achievement strengthened the efficiency of regeneration, which positively influenced the team interaction. They dug the earth around them, gathered all the weapons found, and tried to estimate its value. As a result, their prey was equal to about 10,000 guards, which, as he understood, was far from sufficient to realize the plan. Given his frustration, Elsa tried to cheer him up, assuring that everything was fine and they would definitely find another way. Overwhelmed by indignation and determination, he exclaimed that her soul had become a slave, although she had no guilt behind her. It seemed to be a bearing injustice, and he did not intend to stop until he returned her freedom. He was moved by his determination and sincere care. She lowered her eyes and quietly thanked for the support and desire to fight for her freedom. Suddenly, Ralph had a new thought. He remembered that healing herbs were growing nearby, capable of accelerating wound healing. Raising, the guy broke one of the plants and suggested Elga to attach it to the wound. Despite Elsa's assurances, her wound is not serious and not worried. Ralph insisted on making a dressing on his own. He knew well that even a slight scratch could be a dangerous infection, so he carefully applied the healing grass to the damaged area. Carefully approaching, he gently applied the healing grass to her wound. Elsa, feeling warm and care, thanked him sincerely. At that moment, a special light flashed in the eyes of the girl. She wondered whether Ralph was able to restore not only weapons, but also medicinal herbs. Ralph was genuinely surprised. Such a thought did not even think of him, although in her words, there was a lot of sense. Elsa explained, "If you learn how to restore herbs, it will heal even the hardest wounds, and especially rare plants can be a source of considerable profit." He realized that it could become the same saving straw. so he suggested that he try it immediately. They focused on collecting all the herbs that just came up with them. They collected a large bunch of fresh, shiny leaves unnoticed and silently, and later they carefully unfolded in front of them. Valewi carefully lifted one of the leaves, admiring its amazing properties. These herbs were famous for their legendary quality and could restore the strength of 300. They instantly heal even the most serious wounds and burns. Ralph appreciated this amazing grass at 500,000 gardens, an amount that instantly stunned Elsa. She could not believe what heard. Grasping the Elsa enthusiastically, he suddenly realized how valuable the grasses were collected. The leaves applied to the weapon caused him a true admiration. Working together brought them a striking 6.5 million guard. Ralph's eyes flashed with joy when he realized that they had earned such a significant amount. She watched their success with surprise. Thanks to the income from the sale of herbs and updated weapons, new horizons and prospects have suddenly opened. Amazed at his own luck, Alf wondered if this amount would be sufficient to liberate Elsa. She looked at Ralph with fear, not sure whether it makes sense to give everything for her freedom, because all these things were created by him. He stated with adamant confidence that it was their joint achievement, the fetus of united efforts. His words were deeply exciting. She got up, focused, and gathering with thoughts, asked him for one service. Elsa, with anxiety and surprise, confessed to Ralph that her clothes turned to helpless rags. The anxiety was reflected in her gaze, and she asked her to return to her former appearance. Ralph nodded silently, fully understanding her request. Soon, the system proposed to return Elga her clothes, and Ralph agreed without thought. However, before he had time to do something, Elsa came to his back. The arms of the girl were filled with deep gratitude. His heart was agitated, filled with pride and genuine tenderness. She expressed her joy without any hesitation, and in her voice was a wonderful mixture of gratitude and surprise. Elsa sincerely confessed to Ralph that she dreams of at least to touch someone. Elsa begged him to allow her to feel this instant, to make it possible to fully enjoy this unique experience. Ralph silently agreed, feeling the heart full of the warmth and gratitude of Elsa. They stood together. Her arms were filled with tenderness and sincere gratitude that penetrated the depth of his soul. It seemed that at this moment he stopped his run. Meanwhile, Ralph and Elsa remain inviolable, as if merging with the surrounding nature, becoming an integral part of this ideal moment full of harmony with life around. But their carelessness was sharply interrupted by the appearance of the old man, which was rapidly approaching, waving his hands and pleasing to help. His face distorted horror, and he barely found strength to explain what had happened. Grabbing of fear, the man shouted about the attack of goblins and orcs on their cart. When he approached very close, he began to bow low without hiding panic despair. Suddenly, he recognized the tax inspector of the Valsench family and the husband. It was Almani-san. Suddenly, he was relieved in his gaze. He recognized Els and made sure that everything was fine with her. It was difficult for him to believe that she was at large and completely unharmed. Amani said excitedly, wondering how that could happen, but Elsa interrupted him. She, with a gesture, pointed to Ralph and explained that he had overcome the orca, so Amani may not worry. The inspector dropped Ralph a skeptical look. In his eyes, doubts and distrust were read. Elsa got Rig Orca and stretched it by Almani, noting that Ralph not only defeated the monster, but also saved her life. Almani, looking closely at the trophy, could not believe heard. He twisted the horn in his hands, stunned by the fact that such a young guy was able to overcome the orca. However, looking into the decisive expression of Ralph's face, he suddenly realized that this young man really has the strength to defeat the orca. Gathering with thoughts, the man asked Ralph, thinking about the persistent request of the Daemon for help. The tax collector noted that to return money from the cart, he needed the support of Ralph. They said that their visor was accompanied by the escort of the young owner of the Golden Lions. But as soon as the monsters appeared, the conductors in the panic left everything and fled. After listening to the inspector, he thought for a moment. For a long time, he agreed to complete the task, but put forward one condition. Daemon, without hiding the excitement, was looking forward to what exactly the requirement would be voiced. He unambiguously stated that he would only assist if Elsa was released. Bonnie stunned a similar requirement, and she wondered if Ralph really intended to buy it. He assured that he was not going to buy it, but only wants it to be free from any obligations and could live as he wants. The inspector focused on his eyebrows, reflecting on Ralph's proposal. Recalling that the debt of the village of Elsa reached the astronomical 3 million garterars, he wondered if Ralph had the opportunity to pay such a significant amount. He confessed that he did not have the amount, but offered another option. After receiving 6 leaves of rare almond grass, he reported that each of them was rated at 500,000 garters. The inspector, taking one of the leaves, first smiled, amazed at the boldness of such a statement. But when he looked closely at the grass, his face suddenly changed. Realizing that even 500,000 guards for each letter, a too modest price for such a rare find, Almani estimated the true value of the proposal and accepted Ralph's terms. He assured that Elsa would receive freedom as soon as they have returned money from the van. At the same time they met, and in their eyes they reflected joy and relief. Together with Almani, they went to the place where the van was waiting for them. Although the path was difficult, Ralph and Elsa did not lose their determination. When they reached the van, Raoul approached a loaded cart, full of chests and boxes filled with money and jewelry. When all the cases were completed, Almani approached Elsa. Stopping in front of her, he met her gaze and carefully removed her neck with her neck. Elsa was so impressed that she could not even understand what had happened. Only when a wave of awareness of freedom swept it, did it explode with a joyful exclamation, splashing all her restrained emotions outside. Considering this moving scene, Almani smiled involuntarily. Memories of their own youth came to life when the feelings were as deep and sincere. His heart was warm. Now he understood that he had helped not only recover money, but also to really change someone's life for the better. He approached Ralph and sincerely apologized to the fact that he once doubted his capabilities. After that, he suggested going to the city together. Finally, the cart came to the city walls, and Ralph, along with Elsa, was covered with high stone walls that embodied reliability and peace. They became a clear boundary between the wild, threats to the world, and the safe space of the city. Ralph thanked Almani from all over the heart, especially for the support and rescue of Elsa. Many thanked Ralph for his support, noting that their agreement was especially successful. He stressed that the sale of rare herbs promises considerable profit. When they arrived in the town, Diamond reminded Ralph again of the promised reward for the work done. But suddenly he remembered something and apologized, explaining that he should leave the cart at the intersection. Seeing Ralph behind the counter, the girl smiled warmly. She guessed that the guy brought some trophies, and she was interested in seeing whether she could look at them. Everyone felt relief, not confusion because of someone's ridicule. He carefully put the bag on the table. The girl lifted Orcrane, and in her eyes a surprise broke out. For a moment silence reigned in the room. Everyone was fossilized. But in a moment, quiet whispers filled the space rapidly, growing with every new suspicion. Subsequently, a loud laughter broke out in the hall, behind which sarcastic remarks were heard. Not everyone was convinced that Ralph really brought an orca. Some even let go of jokes, they say, not an orc, but just a large ram that caused a new flash of laughter. Hearing the mockery, Elsa did not restrain himself, and decisively reminded everyone that it was Ralph who defeated both Goblin and the orca. Her words sounded so confident and with anger that for a moment all the present subsided. But in a moment the company exploded again with laughter, capricating that it was proclaimed a full absurdity and no one perceives it seriously. For them, it was unthinkable that the usual garbage can be able to overcome such dangerous creatures. Looking at Elsa with tenderness and gratitude, he realized that she was seeking to protect him. However, Rolf was well aware. No words would now change the opinions of those who surrounded them. "Thank you for her support," he quietly asked to avoid such disputes. Elsa was confused. It seemed unclear why people did not trust Rolf, because she saw his strength and wondered his exceptional skill with her own eyes. At that moment, the girl suddenly announced that all the items that Rolf brought were real. Grace smiled with special pleasure, announcing that the work was truly impressive. She explained that the total cost of crystals in the corner of orcs is 250,000 guards. Those who laughed a minute ago now, having understood their mistake, began to retreat to the side. Suddenly, Figuro appeared next to them, and his unexpected presence further exacerbated the tension that hung in the air. Seeing the roulette, Ralph with an ironic smile noted that God had thrown him a trifle. Figuro also reminded him of the unknown debt to those who would not return. From the tone of the Ralph interlocutor there was more and more annoyance. The consul stood next to Figuro, carefully examining Ralph with obvious distrust and alertness. Some of the audience wondered whether he was trying to cheat, offering the materials that belonged to them. Ralph was confused. He sincerely did not understand what was meant. He cast his gaze on Elsa and noted that she should no longer lie. In addition, he emphasized that the real golden lions would never run away, seeing the average alche. Ralph confidently assured that Elsa said sincerely, which caused a wave of indignant whisper among the escort. One of the attendees, annoyed and angry, retreated forward, asking whether Ralph wanted to repeat their patience and did not intend to humiliate their honor. It was at this moment that a solid, confident voice came in the hall. Almenas, apologizing for the delay, went closer. Seeing others, he slightly looked around, showing a barely hidden surprise. Figuro, demonstrating a clear irritation, turned to him and wondered that he had become a reason for his appearance. Contacting Figuro, Monet said he plans to thank Ralph for his success. Hearing the words Amani, in their voice there were notes of embarrassment. It became obvious that the lie was revealed. They only twist, not finding how to deal with this uncomfortable situation. Having realized the depth of the situation, he slowly bowed his head, and his companions awkwardly sought justification, murmuring indisputable excuses. Looking at Figaro, he remembered how he confessed in his desire to leave this senseless guild and become the heir to his father. He said sharply and ordered, demanding silence, then solemnly announced his decision to go and release the attendants. They stood, staring at each other, and our hero understood with sadness. Figaro would no longer succeed. Elsa, noticing that everything was decided, smiled happy, feeling quiet. In a few moments, they were in the yard, leaving behind the noise and the tense views of the guilders. The evening air was full of warmth and incense, and the gentle wind was intertwined in Elsa's hair. Diamond, having sounded a little tired voice, stopped, looked at Ralph and apologized for all the inconvenience caused by the young masterpeople. Then he reached out a bag with coins, noting that it was a well-deserved reward. The Monolin came nearby so that no one could hear their conversation, and almost whispered, admitted that he had another small personal gift. Ralph took the bag, feeling the pleasant weight and bell of the coins inside. He only nodded in gratitude. The words were not enough to convey a whirlwind of strong feelings that swept it at that moment. For a while they walked a wide corridor that illuminated a soft, warm flame of torches. Their steps were echoed from the stone walls, giving the room a feeling of comfort and rest. Finally, travelers found themselves in a spacious, bright hall, with gorgeous furniture and a huge bed in the middle. It was a real shelter that gave them Amani, a place where you could forget about all anxieties and difficulties. With light in her eyes, she fell rapidly on the bed, allowing its softness and space to gently cover the tired body. She closed her eyes for a moment, tasting this short pleasure, and then returned to Ralph, silently inviting him to join. In his look, he felt deep gratitude and gentleness. He remembered how the night before Elsa invited him to lie down with her on the bed. It is embarrassed, but deeply moved by her words. He slowly approached the bed and sat side by side. Soft pillows and blankets gently wrapped it, filling with warmth and peace. Alf slowly opened his eyes when the first rays of the morning sun slipped through the curtains, filling the room with gentle light. She lay quietly nearby. Her face was gently pushing, and the soft hair was scattered on the pillow. After leaving a cozy bed, he stretched and tried to restore the course of yesterday. At first he hesitated, not sure whether he was ready for such proximity, but eventually succumbed to her gentle voice and settled. Half of the night, he lay with his eyes open, listening carefully to her calm breathing. He seemed incomprehensible as she could sleep at a moment when his thoughts were not left alone, and his heart was crazy in his chest. The light does not fill the whole room. The girl sleeps calmly, as if no anxiety touched her life. Raising in the dark, Ralph looked at Elsa. She lay calm, and this look returned in the memory of the event of a busy, busy day. Ralph remembered how they went through all the difficulties, and her unchanging confidence in him. These thoughts gave him a quiet reassurance. Soon he fell asleep, keeping this quiet, important point. The wedding came quietly and peacefully. Rolf rose out of bed, walked into the window and stared at the city that just woke up. For a long time, he had not had to meet the morning in such rest, without hassle and anxiety. This time, Elsa woke up before he came in, hearing his steps, and greeted him with a good morning. In her voice, tenderness and warmth were swollen, in a special way giving the words of charm. They walked slowly through the streets, giving way to the fussy city. Elsa turned her gaze to Ralph and asked his intentions to date. he said with a smile that at first I would like to look into the guild. I want to dismiss a little. Suddenly, she stated with extraordinary enthusiasm that she also wanted to become an adventure seeker, like him. Ralpha surprised her unexpected determination. When they crossed the threshold of the guild, they were met by the girl for a rack. She helped Elga register and later handed her a card, a simple but significant symbol of new beginnings and opportunities. The girl explained that from now on, Elsa is an official member of the guild, after which she began to talk about the ranks that began with the lowest level, Iron. The world said that travelers take up various tasks all over the country and receive a reward for it. With each new achievement and experience, they increase their rank, which allows you to take up more complex and more paid missions. The highest level is the Platinum rank, accessible only to the most experienced and most talented adventurers. Elsa, holding her card, turned her gaze on Ralph. In his eyes, she noticed both admiration and unwavering determination. Recalling that his parents had already reached the Platinum rank, Elsa wondered with genuine curiosity what level Ralph himself reached. He admitted a little embarrassed that he has only an Iron rank now. Elsa emphasized with new determination that now that they have united, they will do everything possible to reach Platinum rank. Her belief in success and adamant enthusiasm inspired everyone around. Turning to Elsa, he felt a warm wave of support and admiration. Her sincere attraction to adventure was impressed with her purity and touch, and it was impossible to leave it. Ralph stopped at the bulletin board, looking closely at the list of tasks. There was noise and fuss in the guild hall. The adventurers of different ranks discussed their plans lively, preparing for new trials. Among the announcements could be found for every taste, from the protection of respectable persons to the study of mysterious dungeons. However, standing next to Elsa, Ralph noticed that all these orders were intended only for senior adventurers. Elsa expressed the idea of trying something of the proposed, but Raoul recalled that first of all it is necessary to go to the ammunition bench and inspect her armor. He also noted that weapons made yesterday should be put for sale. She rushed deep into the store looking for more appropriate clothes. Ralph has exhausted. Soon, Elsa found herself next to Ralph, confidently squeezing the sophisticated onions. She was delighted in her eyes, and she firmly stated that she was picking up this weapon. After all, she often hunted in her native village, so shooting her onion is well known. After examining the chosen bow, he nodded, approved, and moved to the rack with armor. There, his gaze stopped on a brandy shield and a bib. Taking them into his hands, Ralph immediately felt the genuine weight and strength of the equipment. Holding the things found in front of him, he firmly stated that he was going to buy them. He drew attention to the fact that used equipment was offered here at extremely seductive prices, and that struck him. It was then that they came to them, a chunky man with a thick beard and a friendly look. He stretched them with a bag of money received from the sale of their weapons. The weapon sincerely thanked for the concluded agreement, emphasizing that the new equipment is of first-class quality. The conversation with the gunfire invisibly went to discuss the latest news. He said that the red-eyed Bernard should come to Adgra, a legendary merchant and adventurer, enveloped in countless rumors. The gunman noted that this mysterious guest is able to show interest in any valuable finds. The Emperor with delight said that Bernard is a real adventure master, and the meeting with him promises to be extremely special. According to the weapon, this traveler is constantly traveling the world, engaging in the search, purchase, and sale of the most rare and most expensive artifacts. She did not hide her surprise. Heard. Meanwhile, the armor drew attention to the fact that Ralph is still holding old equipment. He insisted on checking his serviceability, because otherwise it would be too dangerous to risk life. He cast his gaze on Elsa and did not resist the smile. The new bib was sitting surprisingly, but the man wondered if she's armor. She, with a slight smile, assured him that all was well, and assured this bib was very much. After that, he advised not to delay and get to work immediately. Rolf, understanding the weight of their task, proposed to start gathering healing herbs. Suddenly, the system announced him of the discovery of a new active skill, material synthesis. This message was genuinely surprised, and he immediately told Elga. He hurried to the closest thicket and ruthlessly trampled the grass under his feet. This time he told Ralph without delay that he found medicinal and poisonous herbs that could be combined. Synthesizing them, he received a healing pill. Inspired by this success, Ralph proposed to continue the experiments. By combining different objects, they achieved striking results. When combining the grass with the grass, they received a strong rope. When this rope was added to the tree, a mace came to the world, and inserting into it the bone of goblin, the goblin mace. Ralpha overwhelmed the joy of new opportunities. And suddenly the idols broke the strange sounds that came from the pit, which at one time crushed Elsa. Without hesitation, he waved his sword and spread the skeleton in half. The bones flew across the earth, but it was immediately captured by anxious thoughts. Where did this skeleton come from? While he was thinking about it, Elsa invisibly paid his attention to a pit in the ground. The soil just recovered with Ralph suddenly collapsed, opening the passage to the dungeon. Ralph carefully stepped forward and was amazed at the dungeon. The dark corridors, which seemed endless, absorbed every step, echo fiercely silence, adding a place to even more sinister. Ralph looked around closely, aware of what danger this dungeon can be for the city. He suggested examining him to make sure that demons or other threatening creatures are not hiding here. Standing in front of the input to the dungeon, Alphanels decided not to delay a minute to make sure that it is a threat to the city. She understood that if it is a goblin's shelter, she would have the opportunity and accomplish the task of destroying them and take care of the safety of residents. For a moment, everyone froze, staring at the flames of the torch, which he held in his hand. It seemed that even a light breeze barely moved on the side. Noticing his thoughtfulness, Elsa asked that he was worried. Alf noted that he felt a barely swollen wind, a wonderful feeling for a closed dungeon. Suddenly, Elsa sharply commanded him to retreat, and at the same moment he noticed a thin fishing vein stretched right behind her back. He warned Elsa loudly, but she reacted instantly. One fast movement destroyed the wall, and a hidden room immediately appeared before them. Looking intently into the sphere, Ralph was thinking about her origin and magical essence. Carefully approaching the artifact, he noticed that there was no trace left on his surface. He barely touched his fingertips. He suddenly heard sharp mechanical sounds that disturbed the surrounding silence. Elsa tiredly turned into a source of noise, and Ralph realized that he accidentally led the trap. Galagoons with ancient swords and daggers in their hands began to be stolen from the dark corners of the room. Their empty sockets flashed with ominous red light, which created a spooky contrast with the darkness around. He graciously grabbed the sword and despaired to cut the skeletons, desperately protecting himself and Els. With each blow, another enemy was scattered into ashes, but new figures were constantly occupying the place of the fallen. The battle was increasingly inflamed. Suddenly, one of the skeletons, moving especially quickly and powerfully, swung his sword just over Elsa. Seeing this, he reacted lightly. One blow to the enemy in half. The bones were scattered on the ground, losing the magical power that still united them. Gradually realizing that they had been lured into a carefully tuned trap, Ralph felt increasing anxiety. Noticing this, Elsa apologized for her negligence, but he reassured her, assuring that everything was fine with him. He understood that he was not a time to relax, and suggested that he continue the dungeon's research, but this time with twice as much care. Singling the narrow corridors, the group suddenly stopped in front of a small hole in the wall. She was amazed. She approached the stone wolf and carefully touched his paws. But as a bright light broke out around, Elsa threw back. Seeing this, people shouted with horror, but the light went out as suddenly as it appeared, and the stone statue dissolved in the air. Their eyes adapted to the darkness again. In the middle of the marble floor, in the center of the room, they noticed a small black wolf wrapped in a glow that was slowly dispelled. Little Wolf has hardly shifted his breath, and his black wool was full of bloody spots. Elsa, covered with horror and despair, did not look at him. Without hesitation, Rolf got a healing pill from his pocket, which they recently managed to cook. The researchers tried to force the wolf to swallow the pill, but the bleeding did not stop. Rolf appealed to her, calling for the use of destruction against the wolf. Concerned, Elsa confessed that she was not capable of it. She was afraid that the wolf would just disappear. The feeling of guilt pressed on her because of everything that happened, and Rolf firmly broke her reflections. The promise of salvation for him was confident. Alpha assured her that since the beginning of their joint trip, his ability to restore the destroyed has increased significantly. He expressed confidence in his own skills and asked Elsa to trust him. Elsa, not hesitation for a moment, met Ramph's gaze. His confidence and determination filled her belief that everything would end well. She nodded, confidently agreeing, and they wove in her hands, creating a strong union of her skills. As soon as Elsa touched her wolf, Ralph used to use her destructive skill. The system immediately informed that its ability had completely removed the seal, which held back the legendary demonic wolf. He was faced with a difficult choice and understood that it was possible to save a small black wolf using his own recovery skill. Realizing that there was no other way, he dared to use his skill to completely heal the wolf. The room was filled with a bright glow that spilled throughout the room. The light turned out to be so dazzling that Ralph involuntarily closed his eyes. When the light finally went out, they gently opened their eyes and saw a little black wolf in front of them. It joyfully caught its tail, and in his eyes a sincere gratitude glowed. Ralph and Elsa froze in surprise, realizing that they not only saved the wolf, but also discovered something much more than just another dungeon. Rubbing tears of joy, she hugged a tiny black wolf, feeling a deep relief that he was saved. She reopened him again, and clearly felt his little heart beat in unison with her own. The little beast, as if catching her mood, had revived and filled the room with cheerful sounds. Watching this scene, he could not hide the smiles. He was overwhelmed by the pride for his own ability to heal, and at the same time in consciousness, doubts about the future were unnoticed, because Vovchenya was a demon, and the consequences of such intervention remained unknown. She looked at Ralph with a wicked glitter in her eyes, winked him, and suggested that Vovchenya stayed with him. She noted that the wolf seems like the city's walking, and she added with a light smile, "This is a merit of Ralph." Elsa nodded and noticed that this name suits him just perfectly. Ralph confirmed her words with a smile, adding that she was really sweet. But their attention is suddenly distracted by a loud exclamation. He was barely breathing, and anxiety was red on his face. Ralph immediately wondered what had happened. Monta shared that the day before he purchased some medicinal herbs from a wealthy supplier. But the next day, an unknown man bought all these plants, and he was especially interested in their origin. Ralph with his comrades were stunned by the received news. They were confused, not imagining how to proceed or how to respond to this unexpected event. He kept silence, trying not to express his embarrassment, because it was he who, together with Elsa, gathered those plants and turned them into a healing grass known in legends. Ralph realized that his ability to create such valuable things can bring serious trouble if someone learns about it. Use your own abilities to achieve personal gain. Seeing their anxiety, the money tried to reassure Ralph. He assured the audience that the buyer is a person reliable and is quite trusting. The unexpected news from the Diennois stunned everyone. It turned out that the man was Bernard himself with red eyes. At that moment, a woman arose behind them. When Ralph and Elsa looked around, she saw her smiling. She exclaimed that real charming children were standing in front of her. The great blue sorceress Vanessa watched Alpha and Elsa, not hiding her living interest. She noted that their ability to find such valuable medicinal herbs is evidence of their exceptional strength and giftedness. Seeing the surprise on the face of Elsa, 12 explained that Vanessa was Bernard's partner. Suddenly, he was illuminated. If Vanessa appeared here, then Bernard himself should be nearby. Seeing this miracle, Rissy said herself, bouncing around the rabbit. It was a red-eyed Bernard, whose view seemed surprisingly deep and piercing, like heaven. To reassure the puppy, Elsa immediately ordered her to say. NASA approached Bernard, pointed to Ralph and Elsa, and reported that it was these children who found medicinal herbs for them. The art, meanwhile, considered young assistants carefully. Sincere interest was glowing in his gaze. Accidentally meet him in the midst of the forest. His gaze remained gloomy, and the suspicion shone in his eyes. However, Ralph did not take his eyes and confidently repeated that their appearance was accidental. Howard looked carefully and insightfully, as if he wanted to look into the soul of Ralph, to catch at least the slightest shade of falsehood. He explained that in order to achieve this level, the plants should feed the manau contained in the soil. If the herbs become legendary, it is evidence of the exceptional saturation of the earth manai. The smile on his face was barely noticeable, but a hidden threat was read in his eyes. He suggested that Ralph take them to the right place, promising a generous reward for it. Ralph, having shot a little, apologized and confessed that he could not accurately remember the road to the clearing. At the same time, he explained that his ability not only to restore objects, but also to improve their level, properties, and quality. Bernard, stunned by Herd, acknowledged that he had never heard of such before. Leonardo, with a depressed look, clenched his lips and shook his head, clearly demonstrating his disappointment with what this place remains out of sight. Unable to stand, he decisively decided to act. He offered Ralph 3 million, and when it did not cause the desired reaction, he raised the amount of up to 5 million. Seeing such an overflowing amount, Ralph kept his breath. However, he was aware that he had no right to succumb to this temptation. Vanessa, who was standing nearby, turned to Bernard, reminding him that Ralph is unable to explain where the lawn is located. However, as if ignoring her remarks, Bernard raised up to 7 million guards. Bernard sighed deeply and said that such a treasure should not stay in the wild. In his voice, he felt an appeal to Ralph, but on his face read the unbreakable determination of a person who was used to achieving his goals. Their conversation unexpectedly interrupted the voice from behind. It was Figaro, a man who is well known in the city thanks to wealth and remarkable ambitions. He threw a respectful look at Ralph and Elsa and noted that he should not spend time on adventurers. Figaro then invited everyone to his luxurious estate. His tone was undoubtedly powerful, and he did not recognize controversy. Bernard, hesitating, turned his gaze to Figaro, but could not refuse to accept the invitation from such a powerful person. Without waiting for the answer, Figaro added that this evening he was honored in his honor by a solemn feast, so that everyone can see his grandeur. The words of these felt both a compliment and an unconditional order. Ralph and Elsa felt awkwardly under the careful and meticulous look of the owner. Almani, feeling tension, did not slow down to offer guests to the estate. Meanwhile, Rice, a small black wolf, felt the danger of the appearance of Figaro and went to growl. Hearing this, Figaro thrown into a small sharp look and strictly ordered Ralph to calm his pet. Figaro quickly quenched Rissy, strictly ordered to silence. After that, he approached Bernard and clapped him together on his shoulder. His movements were distinguished by confidence and some aggressiveness. Figaro's easy gesture invited Bernard to. She watched this scene with a barely noticeable smile. When Figaro and Bernard departed, she quietly noted that even Figaro could sometimes find benefits. Ralph laughed with her, feeling relieved that a tense conversation with Bernard was avoided. Remembering the need to find a place for the night, he turned to Elsa, noting that they should decide where they would spend this night. Sewing next to Rice, whose tale was tireless, he noted that they would not be allowed to join the Inuit Wolves' Cup. Elsa nodded silently, accepting the idea that she should look for shelter at night. She smiled and asked how Ralph was treating short camping. Ralph was a little surprised, but such a proposal seemed quite right to him. He noted that outside the city their traces will be much more difficult to find, including Ralph Grid. Ralph himself was not too glad to face Bernard and his partner again. They decided to go to the guild and take the task that could be the opportunity to leave the city for them. Field, Ralph and Elsa decided to take the task of clearing the dungeons. They had to destroy the goblins and collect healing herbs. This choice was perfect to stay out of someone else's attention. Soon they went on the road, well-armed and determined to meet new adventures. When the tent was already installed, Ralph got a brand new black collar, which he bought specifically for Rice, and began to put it on a wolf. In the meantime, Rissy ran around the lively circles, sniffing all around and giving his voice joyfully. As soon as the dish was ready and the fresh warmth of the dinner poured seductive aromas through the air, Ralph, standing at the fire, did not hide the delight. He looked enthusiastically at the food and proclaimed that it looked incredibly appetizing. They started dinner, filling the evening with a slow pleasure. Ralph drew attention to how skillfully Elsa found in any, even completely unexpected conditions the most delicious dishes. Rice was also satisfied with his treat. He woven with appetite, all lying on his plate. Elsa, smiling and winking Ralph, cheerfully noticed that her skill in archery speaks for herself. In such a moment, Ralph felt particularly acutely what good luck is for him as a devoted girlfriend and a consistently reliable associate like Elsa. The night in the forest stood quiet and calm. The silence was broken only by single voices of night animals and a slight crackling of the fire. Ralph and Elsa sat by the campfire, thinking thoughtfully. Ralph proposed to go to the lake tomorrow to gather healing herbs. Elsa, smiling gently, agreed, and noticed that it is worth going to bed earlier. There are many things ahead, and they would need a lot of strength. The fire gently illuminated their faces, giving warmth and comfort in the midst of the night silence of the forest. Suddenly, Elsa returned to Ralph. In her gaze, deep thoughtfulness glowed. She whispered boldly that she would like to ask him. Ralph looked at her with surprise, full of expectations. After calming down, she kneeled quietly and confessed that she was used to falling asleep since childhood, on her father's knees. Warm memories swelled in her voice, and she asked Raoul to allow her to feel the familiar comfort again. It was enveloped by a wave of tenderness. He carefully held his palm through her hair, and soon Elsa, closing her eyes, plunged into sleep. Morning met Ralph with the first sunlight, which was barely noticeably leaked through the tent fabric. He suddenly opened his eyes, concerned with unusual growls and unknown sounds. For a moment, he stopped carefully at what is going around. He ran out of the tent lightly and immediately noticed the alarming state of the reality. Something was wrong. World, the dog, looked closely at one point. Ralph's shouting, Elsa was rustling, left the tent and joined him. Both noticed a crowd of people who gathered just in the way. Gona was accompanied by several comrades among the crowd. With a sharp straightforwardness, he stated that they were expelled from the ranks of Golden Lions, precisely through Ralph and Elsa. Arya, standing nearby, picked up angrily. Now, they say, they will find out what it means to be exiles. He recognized these people, and realized that they appeared to take revenge on the ancient case. Godota's gaze was fierce, and he strictly ordered Ralpha to apologize. He strictly repeated his order, to apologize and to openly admit that he had been deceived by Mr. Chimera. He also added that if Ralph is asked to return them to the guild, they may still be given mercy. Squeezing the sword in his hands, he strongly stated that they did not deceive Figaro and did not intend to apologize for what they did not commit. Barely the converting heard Ralph renouncing, they rushed forward, clinging and shouting that it would not get off his hands and that he was waiting for death. The attacker swung his sword in the direction of Ralph, and he effortlessly parried the attack, and, skillfully wrapping his knife, instantly smashed a hostile blade into debris. The convoy, hoping for the effect of suddenness, tried to sneak into Ralph from behind and strike, but immediately stopped by an accurate blow that hit the shield. Under the influence of the incredible speed and strength of Ralph, in a moment all the attackers were defeated on the ground. Stunned, they tried to grasp where such superhuman abilities and skills came from it. Humiliated with their defeat, they felt anger and powerlessness. Raising heavy from the ground, they realized that their enemy has become much more powerful since they saw the last time. Gona looked at Ralph's sword carefully, holding his gaze on his sharp blade. Weighing everything, he rushed to the attack, aiming at Ralph with a clear intention to deprive him of his life. He realized that the clash with this danger was inevitable, taking into account the experience and skill of the Gato in fencing. Nevertheless, he was determined to accept the challenge and fight. With a powerful blow, their swords were crossing, sparks broke in the air, and each new splash of force was accompanied by a tense exclamation. Watching Gato, the converting to Ralph, the converting stated that Ralph was not worthy of his opponent, remaining a pathetic nun. From these words, Ralph was buried by indignation. Meanwhile, Godot bowed to him and whispered quietly that his situation here is only temporary. At the same moment, the Hydratite struck and knocked the sword out of Ralph's hands. The weapon fell, inflating into the ground, and Ralph, frozen from surprise, was forced to retreat. She stood with a bow with alert, aiming tightly towards Gato. Suddenly, something behind her back was done with a rush, and she lost balance. Seeing the authorities heading in her direction, she cried, seeking to warn. At the same moment, the branch entangled the body of Elsa, squeezing her in her cliffs. She stressed with annoyance that the helplessness of her subordinates does not allow them to cope with even such weak opponents as Ralph and Elsa. They were ashamed of accusations. They were humiliated because their leader, having obtained a gold rank, left them incapable of coping with the task. The branches continued to squeeze Els, not letting her breathe. Seeing that the situation was out of control, Gudota exclaimed to Arya, threatening that he would kill the girl if he did not stop immediately. Suddenly, the sharp sword cuts through thick barbed branches, freeing Els from the trap. The unexpected appearance of Vanessa and Bernard jumped all present by surprise. The mood in the room changed instantly when Arya, with anger, cast a reproaching look at Vanessa and accused the one of destroying her own magic. Vanessa just smiled and assured calmly, "Arya's magic looks great, and a little special is prepared for her." In a moment she created her ears with her own magic, which immediately grew up in Arya on her head. Vanessa warned that if you cannot remove this spell, with such Arya ears will have to live forever. Meanwhile, Bernard looked at Ralph and Elsa. He had already reached various rumors about this couple, so he decided to find out the situation on his own. Turning to Godot, Bernard suggested that he is ready to leave Elsa and Ralph alone if he gives the word to forget everything that witnessed. Hearing Bernard's proposal and realizing that the events were out of his will, the hero nodded. Retreating back, he looked at Ralph and Elsa focusedly and declared strongly that he was going to talk to Figaro first before making any decision. His words were made at the same time as a promise and as a warning, leaving the interlocutors in hard expectation. At this point, realizing that the fight was temporarily exhausted, Ralph returned to Bernard and sincerely thanked him for his support. Bernard just smiled and replied that gratitude was not needed, because he was looking for Ralph. His careful look slid on Ralph and Elga, evaluating their condition and combat skills, as if he had already decided on an important solution. His attention to Ralph and Elsa was not just a manifestation of curiosity. This was the desire to continue his negotiations. He tried to convince them to accept his proposal, assuring that it could radically change their lives for the better. In his language, he urged them to become bold merchants. Bernard has explained that their experience in combat and ability to survive in wild areas can be extremely valuable to achieve its goals. He firmly believed that people such as Ralph and Elsa were able to become true indispensable allies. Ralph, not recovering after a recent clash and salvation, looked at Bernard in confusion. Markard's proposal seemed extremely attractive and promising, especially given all of them before. Ralph and Elsa exchanged his eyes without deciding to make a choice at once. Staying on a path that is full of battles and dangers, or to try a new path that promised peace and perhaps the true balance of the soul, Inard expressed his willingness to support Ralph and Els in all their endeavors. After that, we appealed to others with the proposal to postpone the discussion and invited everyone to continue the conversation in his room. Looking closely at Ralph, she wondered what to do next. At that time, Ralph suggested that Bernard, perhaps with a satellite, would like to know more about the legendary plant that was so persistently searched. He noted that if the task was already accomplished, they should join it. Elsa agreed, although she continued to be concerned about what reason the adventurers needed their help. Without knowing the answer, he suggested not to reveal his extraordinary abilities. Elsa agreed with him, nodding confidently. Soon, after a short traveler, they reached the giant train, exactly the one mentioned by Bernard. Ralph was concerned. The meeting was to take place here, near this impressive machine. Although they were not offered to rise on board, they still went inside. The interior of the train was impressed with both size and luxury. Bernard, a little awkward, invited them to enter, and explained that he was using this train as a resting house, and at the same time as a repository for his numerous treasures. In addition, he noted that 10 horses were hidden here, always ready for any adventure. He proudly noted that the building of his train is made of mythal, one of the strongest and most rare materials in the world. This was what made the train almost invulnerable to the attacks of monsters that could happen on their way. Above them, in the depths of the wagon, where the spacious storage facilities were opened, completely filled with barrels and boxes. Looking around, there was a sarcastic smile that she should not be surprised by Bernard's poverty. He seemed to spend all his fortune on this train, and yet she noticed that now they have a cozy shelter and wide, comfortable beds. Once Ralph and Elsa were comfortable with soft sofas, the owner suggested that they sit down and started a conversation. In addition, NASA assured that their conversation is not listened to here, and this further exacerbated the atmosphere of rest and safety. At first, it seemed that the interlocutors were seeking to discuss medicinal plants that were harvested. But suddenly Bernard stated that he was not interested in it at all, which was quite surprised by Ralph. Suddenly, the silence of a cozy crew was broken by Bernard Compet. With unexpected passion, he stated that he was actually interested in only one thing: Ralph's abilities. This phrase sounded like a thunder in the clear sky. Ralph and Elsa froze, confused with such an unexpected confession, without deciding to answer the direct question immediately. Their views were crossed, and anxiety and confusion flashed in the eyes of Elsa. Hart, without waiting for the answer, spoke further, explaining that he already knew everything. Mr. Figaro told everything. According to him, Ralph actually has a rare ability to regenerate, which is highly appreciated. Ralph nodded a little, confirming it. However, the next moment his shoulders dropped, his head leaned, and he sadly acknowledged that, despite his own skill, he had never managed to apply it. In the voice of bitterness, a bitter sadness sounded when he confessed that it was this event that led to his expulsion from the Golden Lion Guild. I listened carefully, but the interlocutor's face remained elusive. He noted that he was already aware of it, and asked how things are going on. In a tone of his words, it was heard that he understands much more than makes it possible to understand others. He spoke further, noting that he was aware not only of Ralph's exile, but also about how they overcame Ogre, found medicinal herbs and opened a new dungeon. It seemed that his story touched the depth of the experienced. Every event appeared in his words with special expressiveness. They were surprised to look at, not believing that Bernard was aware of all the details of their recent adventures. Noticing their impression, Bernard did not look away, looking at them with confidence, emphasizing the importance of his every phrase. He stressed that Ralph and Elsa were central figures in everything that happened. He noted that in recent days, Ralph and Elsa have become different, and this change alerted him. Looking closer, he came to the conclusion that there were some unusual circumstances behind it. Bernard has frankly confessed that he does not believe in the version of the accidental detection of legendary herbs. In his opinion, it is absolutely incredible. His gaze stopped on Ralph, and he sharply emphasized, it was Ralph who, due to his unusual abilities, improved the condition of the grass. Ralph stood in front of him, not finding words for answer. He did not leave a sense of vulnerability, as if he had just been revealed. It remains a mystery of how Ralph's skill works. No one found out. However, Bernard, watching them carefully for several days, was able to reveal this secret on its own. Watching everything that happened around, Bernard was gradually aware of this world inhabited by legendary heroes, such as Red, friendly Bernard, whose talents and skills go far beyond the usual ideas. Finally, Ralph nodded and asked to leave him with Elsa alone. Understanding the exceptional importance of this moment, Bernard agreed without hesitation. Elsa came out of the train, leaving behind both Bernard and the confusion of her own thoughts. Hardly holding back joyful excitement, she noted for herself what her companions were. They immediately solved his abilities. Ralph, having calmly taken Elsa by his hand, reported that he wanted to discuss with her. In their views, there was a complete understanding and silent support. In a few minutes they returned to the carriage. Bernard, noticing their arrival, was surprised that the conversation lasted so long. Elsa sat on her place, and Rolf, gathering with his forces, announced her readiness to demonstrate skills. At the same time, he expressed a single condition: it should remain their secret. Bernard has accepted this requirement with significant seriousness and respect. Bill turned to Bernard with interest, asking if any things were injured. He was surprised by Bernard's unexpected attention to this topic, and he thought about possible breakage. At this point, Vanessa, when she was in the spotlight, remembered the morning incident with a broken cup. Vanessa raised the fragments of the cup to the table where Ralph was waiting, and he gratefully accepted them. Luckily inspecting the broken cup, Ralph turned to Elsa and gently took her hand. Meanwhile, Elsa easily touched the cup and inadvertently awakened her destructive force. The ceramics broke into small debris in an instant. Bernard watched this spectacle with delight, and Ralph, meanwhile, explained that Elsa was endowed with a special gift. After Ralph's words, she suddenly realized that even the most brutal things, such as walking without gloves or touching objects with bare hands, were turning up for Elsa with solid difficulties. His explanation made the girl lower her head. Noticing her embarrassment, he smiled gently and soothingly, assured that the touch of her would have no consequences. Carefully taking her hand, he stunned both Bernard and Vanessa, because it completely denied everything they had just learned. At that moment, squeezing her palm, Ralph involved his own power. The cup, scattered on powder, began to slowly gain the original shape. Its wreckage, like back in time, flooded, creating a holistic object again. Bernard looked at it with a passionate surprise, unable to believe his own eyes. He spoke with confidence in his voice, opening his own abilities to the listeners. His unique skill was called Regeneration, thanks to which he was able to neutralize the devastating effects of Elsa's ability, returning objects to their original state. Immersed in his own thoughts, Inard sought to comprehend everything he had just heard. Noticing the confusion of a friend, Ralph continued to clarify. His skills not only allowed the restoration of damaged things, but also made it possible to see their true value. Carefully examining the recovered cup, Ralph immediately determined that it was made of rare ceramic glass and cost at least 10,000 gardens. In Hard's eyes, the understanding broke out that in heard words he suddenly discovered something essential and still hidden. Continuing, he drew attention to the fact that his ability was not manifested separately. It acquires only in combination with the destructive potential of Elsa, creating a special synergic effect between them. Ralph continued his explanations, supporting the words with specific examples. In particular, he mentioned how he used his own talent in working with medicinal herbs. Thanks to its impact, they have acquired much more powerful healing properties. After that, the herbs became much more effective. Bernard listened carefully and nodded slowly, increasingly aware of the power and potential endowed with this ability. NASA, which listened to it carefully, suddenly smiled, and noted that their common ability has an almost romantic appearance. However, Ralph answered her with a serious look, emphasizing that her skills were related to certain risks. He told that he was able to create legendary objects from the most common things. Hearing this, Bernard suddenly realized a similar ability can be the subject of envy, and even a tool for war if they learn about it. Ralph only confirmed his assumption. Suddenly, Garda became obvious. If Ralph began to trade his unusual magic products, it would certainly arouse undesirable interest. Someone wants to find out where these things come from and who creates them. At the same moment, Ralph, as if feeling Bernard's thoughts, firmly reported that they had already considered all this with Elsa. He explained that they agreed to become brave merchants and sell their own goods, but on one essential condition: everything will happen only with the support and advice of Bernard. Having realized the seriousness of this proposal, Bernard nodded silently in response. Then Ralph decided to open some of his history, saying that his parents were also bold adventurers. In their youth, they took assignments from the guild and went on a long journey. Since then, Ralph has been convinced that his parents are still traveling the world. That is why Ralph made a decision to become a traveler. He sought not only to see the world, but also perhaps find his parents. The story of the oak dip, as well as the tense gestures of those who gathered in the room, only exacerbated the alarming atmosphere that prevailed there. Ralph unexpectedly, gathering the last forces of the spirit, appealed to Bernard with a proposal to join their team. His gaze glowed with determination, and an unconcealed hope was heard in his voice. Feeling the sincerity of Ralph's intentions, Bernard agreed without hesitation. He is convinced that this man will become a real ally for them. Returning to Elsa, Bernard wondered if she had no objections to the decision. Elsa, answering with a smile and special warmth, assured that she would always remain near Ralph and support him in any intention. At that moment, she carefully lifted a little wolf named Rice in her hands and smiled gently, reported that he would also become part of the team. As if feeling the importance of this moment, the wolf gently leaned against her. Vanessa approached, carefully stroked the beast, and greeted a new member of the group with joyful admiration. Not hiding her grip on his soft wool and expressive eyes, Vanessa soon switched attention to a more practical question. Noting that in their modest shelter only 2 beds, she joked with a slight smile. What it means, she would have to share a bed with Bernard. It was amazed by its frankness, Bernard immediately, and did not find words to answer. Vanessa, not paying attention to his embarrassment, turned to Ralph and Elsa, inviting them to take a bed that Bernard leaves free. Realizing that he and Elga would have to spend the night together, Ralph felt his cheeks suddenly flashed. He tried to hide confusion, but Vanessa, having caught this moment, could not quench his curiosity. With excitement, she wondered if he had embarrassed his situation. Not finding a place, he murmured something incomprehensible, avoiding her gaze, while Vanessa watched his embarrassment with cheerful laughter, frankly rejoicing in this moment. Suddenly, Elsa glanced at Bernard and Vanessa, and, a little lost, she wondered if they were accidentally spouses. Bernard did not expect such a surprise, and, struck by the question, for a moment, not finding words for answer, Bonus, without losing peace and gentle smile, noted that they were not her husband and wife, though she had nothing against it. However, in her opinion, Bernard is not ready for such a serious step, and she is now completely absorbed by the study of magic. After surprising, Bernard added that they were first and foremost colleagues, and even in the case of marriage, their relationships and joint work will remain the same. Having realized and accepted her role, she nodded silently. Meanwhile, Vanessa quietly came from her back to Bernard and hugged him, feeling the gentle warmth of his body through his clothes. Vanessa gently wondered what he would like for dinner, flirtatiously teasing him with her closeness. Bernard, suddenly shaking from embarrassment, quietly asked her to stop. With frank pleasure watching his reaction, Vanessa slowly moved to the exit of the room. She turned to Elsa with the edge of her eye whether she wanted and joined the dinner. Elsa eagerly attacked this proposal, and without hesitation, followed Vanessa, leaving Ralph alone with her own thoughts. Once upon a time, after the expulsion from the Golden Lions, Ralph was convinced that his adventure career had finally ended. But now he was in the detachment with the famous Bernard, famous throughout the world with an adventurer, and felt involved in a true big cause. During the joint dinner, Ralph realized that he could not even imagine such wonderful events before. Every day, the belief in the fascinating adventures awaited in front of them only grew, and his heart was fulfilled by a joyful anticipation. Waking up the next morning, Ralph immediately felt something surprisingly gentle and soft near his face. Ralph looked around with surprise and noticed some oily substance near the head. Raising from bed, he noted how Reese immediately took a place near Elsa, coming up near her with special comfort. The idea was thought. What is really the most important thing you are able to do? At the same moment, Nessa came to the room and greeted Ralph on a good morning. She straightened, though she has not yet woke up. Seeing the serious expression of his face, Nessa smiled and noted that a real man always took responsibility. After being lost, he did not fully realize what responsibility was in her words. Ralph was embarrassed, feeling as more of his embarrassment. Meanwhile, Bernard approached them, smiled unobtrusively, and politely asked Vanessa to stop Ralph. Yu, throwing a slightly angry look at Bernard, suddenly asked yesterday's evening noise. Bernard, having a misunderstanding, only slightly shrugged. It was at this moment that Elsa, awakened by their conversation, got out of bed and tried to understand what was happening. Noticing that Elsa was no longer asleep, she suggested that everyone be refreshed before the start of a new day, to go to the bathroom and take a shower. She herself jokingly smashed Bernard's hair, which is why he asked her to stop. He still tried to take his hands and said he no longer wanted to take a shower. He asked Vanessa to stop joking, and then, even having raised his voice, he threatened that he would be angry if she did not stop. However, the threat of him was more fun than seriously. At this moment, the room was called a loud snoring of the Arze, and everyone laughed, clearly, having felt clearly. A new day, full of adventures and challenges, awaited them in front of them. The first day of Elsa and Ralph began as traders. They exchanged smiles, feeling that they were waiting for great adventures. Their journey had just begun, and both were determined to move forward, supporting each other in all circumstances. With each step, their connection became increasingly stronger, forming a real team ready to meet any challenges. Garros carefully polished the new armor, which dazzlingly shone under the rays of the morning sun. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. She tacitly spoke of deep inner peace and unbreakable confidence. Only one of the guards suddenly broke into the room. In his eyes he frozen, and a voice full of anxiety, he reported troubles. Figaro immediately alerted, turned sharply and demanded explanations. Converse. Earlier, Ralph and Bernard entered the guild, immediately arousing a common interest. The girl was standing for all sorts of requests, did not expect to hear what they came to. She asked embarrassed whether their request was clear. The girl concentrated the document stating that the Ralph group decided to become traders and join the Bernard group. Raising her eyes, she looked at the men with surprise. Bernard, who stood next to Ralph, confidently confirmed her assumption, which caused even more surprise to all present. A wave of astonishment swept in the hall, which instantly covered all present. Those who heard this news could not believe their ears at first. Everyone wondered how it happened that he seemed to be a vain ability to persuade Bernard to accept him in his group. Carol, holding back the surprise, smiled and suggested that Ralph sign the document. Ralph, having sighed nervously, had already raised his hand for signature, when suddenly a sudden intervention suddenly stopped him. The unexpected appearance of Figaro caused a wave of whispers and tension in the hall. Figaro, concentrated and serious, approached Bernard. His gaze seemed to pierce him through and asked direction, whether these words really belonged to him. The hero continued, calling Ralph full of worthless, and confidently stated that he would not be useful for the team. Keeping outward peace, he confidently announced that Ralph would become a new cargo carrier in their team. He added that this appointment is not subject to discussion, and is necessary for effective work of the whole group. Figaro, not understanding what Bernard was guided in his decision, noted with annoyance that it was possible to take anyone to the post of receptionist, and Ralph will only disgrace their reputation with empty promises and inability to bring true benefits. Hearing this, Ralph felt anger, because he always tried to be sincere and never deceived anyone. Having met the Ralph's angry look, he firmly denied that the figure was incorrectly stated. He remembered how Ralphie was kicked out of Golden Lions in his time, and this was the decisive for him to accept the guy in his community of merchants. Bernard sincerely believed in Ralph's potential and sought to give him a chance to prove his true value. He believed everyone deserves a second attempt, especially when they had to go through trials and injustice. Figuro glanced at Bernard and firmly offered him to join the Golden Lions Guild. In his voice there was an undeniable confidence, and the words had a great conviction. However, Bernard answered calmly. He politely refused, noting that he had many more cases that he had to complete. He announced that he could not accept such a generous offer. A wave of surprised whisper passed in the hall. No one expected such an answer. To refuse to invite to Golden Lions was considered unprecedented. Everyone froze in hard expectation when Bernard again repeated, "He cannot agree to Figaro's proposal." The faces of the audience mixed surprise and admiration, because no one dared to refuse such a prestigious guild. Feeling that he had affected his self-love, Figuro only nodded, and noted that the impression was that Bernard did not perceive his own guild seriously. He noted with sarcasm that there was a noticeable change in the mood of Bernard with the advent of small capital, which is why it began to seem that he was not worth anything now. The girl, without hiding the annoyance, announced that in this case she wanted to make an official statement. "From now on," she said, "forces and family completely break all connections with the Bernard group." There was a dead silence in the hall, and all the views were chained to this tense scene. Figuro, having clasped his fists, kept his best. Without saying a word, he resolutely left the guild, slamming the door so loudly that this sound was heard all over. Worried about events, he looked at Bernard and asked if everything would be fine. Bernard, trying to reassure him, explained that Figuro's father is the head of the family, and even if they do not succeed, they still have many other trading partners. With a light smile, Bernard added that you should not worry too much. Figuro just should be able to succumbing a little. Noticing that the tension gradually decreases, the employee at the stable suggested proceeding to further registration of documents. Thankfully, looking at new comrades and feeling their support, he breathed deeply, gathering all courage and determination, then confidently put his signature. This symbolic gesture testified to his official joining to the brave company of adventure traders. The girl behind the stable, noticing his determination, smiled warmly and congratulated Ralph, announcing that he was now recognized as an official member of the community. Standing nearby, he reached out. His eyes read confidence and hope for fruitful cooperation. He squeezed his hand, looking for strength and support for a new life stage in this gesture. Between them, the gaze flashed, a solid, determined, and faith in the coming. Bernard Lee looked at the counter, and then, with a serious expression, turned to the girl for a stable guild. In her gaze, experience and confidence that came only over the years of service were felt. Trying to keep calm, Bernard was politely wondered if they had magical crystals. Without losing professional collection, she thoughtfully raised her eyebrows. After removing several heavy volumes and a stack of documents from the counter, she went to carefully view them. In a few minutes, she raised her eyes and calmly reported that there are now about 3,000 magical crystals in the warehouse. Bernard, who used to deal with large-scale equipment, was surprised for a moment, but quickly took himself. He smiled and confidently stated that he would buy them all. Suddenly failing with such a significant order, she froze for a moment, trying to grasp the herd. Her eyes were widely revealed, but she quickly gathered, retaining her professional endurance, and he nodded politely. Nidroa was careful to handle crystals, emphasizing that the cost of each is 300 gardens. He wondered if such a sum suits them. The girl, sitting again on a horse, politely asked to wait a little to have time to draw up all the necessary documents. This time, Ralph, concerning the large number of crystals lying in front of him, asked Bernard whether everything was in order. It seemed to him that such a number exceeded all boundaries. Bernard only smiled gently and explained that it was thanks to these crystals that Ralph will be able to absorb power and develop their regeneration skills. He assured Ralph that it was an important investment in his future. In addition, he explained that the monster produces a flame of such power that they have already lost any hope of winning it. Ralph's words hurt a genuine sense of gratitude, and he already wanted to give gratitude to Bernard when another person suddenly approached him. In front of them put Guildmaster, Mr. Fran. A man with a striking appearance, wise look, and a confident posture, he greeted them with a restrained smile. Slightly smiling, Fran asked Bernard whether he really intends to buy all the magical crystals. Bernard confidently confirmed his intention. Bernard followed the conductor in the shaded corner of the warehouse, where there were massive barrels filled with the edges of the magical crystals. Their soft light flicked on the wooden walls, filling the room with a mysterious and charming aura. Fran, verse, shared that Guild still does not know how to apply these crystals. He added that if you just get rid of them, wild animals can find crystals, and then they will turn into dangerous monsters. Bernard has confidently promised a friend that they would treat the crystals carefully and responsibly. Looking carefully at the expressions of Bernard and Ralph's faces, he wondered with a barely noticeable suspicion in his voice why they have so many crystals. Feeling the tension, Ralph wondered how Bernard would answer. Keeping calm, Bernard said with confidence that it would definitely find a worthy use of crystals. However, he was in no hurry to reveal all the details, explaining that he was acting at the request of one of his friends. Inspired by the resulting answer, he barely smiled noticeably and assured that he was fully trusting Bernard. He promised to prepare all the necessary documents and crystals for transmission. He expressed his gratitude for his cooperation and asked to withdraw for the crystals from the personal account of the guild. Fran only nodded silently and began to record important information. However, as soon as Bernard was going to leave, France suddenly stopped him with an exclamation. In France's view, the features of seriousness and perseverance were flashed when he restrained his humble request. He said in a quiet voice that a new dungeon was found near the city. Since then, monsters began to appear in the vicinity, and he sought to gather as much information about this dungeon as possible. He stressed that only Bernard, the most fair adventurer in the city, is able to cope with this task. Franz, with a note of determination in his voice, wondered if he could count on his support. Bernard met with him. In his eyes, a reflection on a risky journey to a dangerous dungeon was read, because the preparation for such a test required great care. Bernard listened carefully to Fran, thought for a moment, and then confidently accepted her proposal. He noted that he needed some time to prepare, because this mission needs a detailed plan. Bernard rated the remuneration for the task of 3 million gardens, promising to raise the amount of 4 million if the mission was successfully completed. A friend, understanding the requirements, nodding as a sign of consent, and promised to prepare everything he needed for this difficult mission. France gratefully noted the consent of Bernard, and then added that he also wanted Ralph for his significant contribution to the opening of the dungeon. He emphasized that it is thanks to Ralph that the research information received from Ralph should have a chance to move much faster and more effectively. France offered Ralph 2.5 million coins, and allowed to pick up everything he could find in the dungeon. In addition, in the case of successful purification of the dungeon, he promised to add 3 million more coins. This proposal became more attractive. Ralph Law looked closely at Bernard, and, feeling the full weight of this proposal, immediately agreed. He realized that he was not only a great opportunity for the team, but also the opportunity to show his own skills and gain new experience. With gratitude nodding Bernard, Ralph proposed to share his knowledge and help during the campaign through the dungeon. Leonardo, recognizing the significance of the proposed assistance, nodded again and assured that they were accepting this request. French thanked for their determination and willingness to meet the challenge. Noticing the relief in the eyes of Leonard, the man cautiously exhibited barrels with crystals, one by one. His confident hands were easily slid on even wooden sides, securely securing each barrel in place. No crystal was superfluous. Every unit of precious cargo could play a crucial role in their fate. It took some time, and after completing the load, Ralph got off the train. A light sweat performed on his face, but a satisfied spark glowed in his eyes. The work was done. Going to Bernard, he calmly reported to the successful completion of crystals. Bernard thanked Ralph, appreciating his diligence and understanding how important this part of the task was. After that, he recalled that Vanessa and Elsa went to the armory store and suggested that Ralphoff join them. Realizing that the preparation for the trip would require considerable funds, Bernard pulled a small bag of money and reached out to Ralph. Feeling the weight of the coins, Ralph realized that it is more than just financial support. It is a manifesta. This question was embarrassed by Bernard for a moment. He did not fully understand why Ralph, having the opportunity to get a new, brilliant weapon, prefers old, already used. But in Ralph's words, confidence and familiar intonation, who made Bernard think. Everyone looked at him with such confidence that Bernard's doubts gradually disappeared. These views read something that finally convinced him of the correct choice of Ralph. He may have been moving the experience or knowledge that Bernard had only had to be grasped. In the end, he trusted his friend and agreed, allowing Ralph to choose and buy everything he would consider it necessary. Ralph engulfed joy and relief. It was extremely important for him to feel and support in his own decisions and elections. Standing on the threshold of a new trial as a merchant and an adventure seeker, he understood that in addition to skills, he needed thy. After a brief conversation, they went to the arsenal. On the way, Ralph was immersed in reflection on a future choice. He imagined how he viewed swords and daggers, carefully assessing their balance, blade sharpness, and how comfortable they are in their hand. Once Ralph went to the gunman, he was stopped immediately. He hastily apologized for late, lifted his eyes, and froze from an unexpected sight. Elsa and Vanessa stood in front of him, dressed rather for the holiday than for battle. With a light smile, Vanessa asked Ralph whether he likes what Elsa looks like in his new dress. Ralph stunned the unexpected appearance, and he hastily turned away, feeling the cheeks flashing the heat. He tried to understand what made them dress in this way, but the thoughts were confused and not succumbed. Noticing his confusion, Nasa hurried to explain that she only wanted to decorate Elsa a little and add a variety to their routine work. Without losing smiles, she suggested waiting for them outside, so that they could safely choose their weapons. Ralph and Elsa nodded, approved, and Vanessa went outside. When they stayed together, they focused again on the main task. Soon, Ralph took several samples and carefully spread them on the counter. Seeing their choice, Smith smiled warmly and spoke. He noted that he had heard about their current work by merchants under the direction of Mr. Bernard and offered them a special discount. The Bronchi looked closely at the ancient swords and daggers which Ralph posted on the counter. Surprising his eyebrows, he wondered why they were outdated with these outdated blades, and suggested to choose new shiny blades. Ralph confidently replied that they were fully satisfied with the existing arsenal. Remembering that moment, he saw again the determination broke out in Ralph's gaze. The man noted that these guys were really strange, but at the same time remained respected customers. Ralph continued to carefully consider the rows of weapons, neatly exhibited along the walls of the store. His gaze stopped at the corner where the old, worn swords, daggers, and other weapons were lying as if forgotten and unnecessary. This time there, noticing the surprise of the weapon, he only nodded and explained that Mr. Bernard instructed him to gather as many weapons as possible. At the same time, made armor caused him more and more surprise, so he wondered why they have so many old weapons. Smiling, he assured that these weapons were intended for only one nobleman. Confidence in his voice added to the words of weight, and he felt that it sounds convincing. Bruni, feeling his sincerity, supported this version, and even suggested that Ralph and Bernard may form his own army. He smiled gently, imagining how an armed detachment of those nobles turns into a powerful army. He noted that all the nobles are similar in their business. They always seek more and cheaper. In his words, an irony was heard, which the gunman quickly caught and laughed sincerely. After that, the master assured that he would prepare everything necessary for transportation, and began to draw up documents and build accounts. For a while, Ralph and Elsa returned to Bernard's wagon. Ralph, having a little breathing, immediately began to apologize for the delay, but he interrupted Bernard, approvingly noting that they had coped with the work as much as possible. Valve slowly followed the trolley, which was loaded with drawers with weapons and a variety of equipment. Bernard, having gained a careful look, acknowledged that they really got a lot of things, and wondered how much it cost. Ralph, barely noticeably smiling, reported that the total purchase amount was only 600,000 guards. Leonardo nodded approved and noted Ralph's business skill, praising him for a trade shaking, which he began to show more. The standing nearby also paid attention to Ralph. He smiled awkwardly, feeling sincere warmth and support from his friends. Looking into the van, Vanessa noted that only equipment and weapons remained inside. Her attention was attracted by an empty space. It was there that lay a red dress, which Elsa tried on. Without restraining her curiosity, Vanessa wondered why she did not take such a good thing with her. In response, Elsa was barely noticeable, and noticed that she did not need this dress. In her voice, modesty and slight uncertainty were heard. Nasa, not hiding the dissatisfaction with the herd, carefully approached Ralph and whispered quietly that a real man should fulfill all the desires of the girl. In her voice there was a sincere concern for a girlfriend. Elsa and Vanessa were passionate about the dress and other outfits, while Ralph, watching from the outside, suddenly realized how significant the words of Vanessa were. Gathering with his thoughts, Ralph was approaching Elsa. His determination glowed in his eyes. The heart was beating louder, but he was not credited to. He firmly said that he would soon gain the glory of a brave adventure seeker. He assured her that he would certainly buy everything she desires. In his words, a sincere consent and a passionate desire to make her happy. Hearing his words, she slightly smiled, and in her eyes the warmth flashed. She calmly assured that she did not need anything. However, he did not allow her to finish, suddenly exclaimed that he would never work. In his voice, there was already an unwavering confidence. He insisted that she should always wear beautiful clothes, because in his opinion she was worthy. In his words, genuine passion and determination were felt. Elsa, confused with excitement and moved by such perseverance, looked at him with gratitude. It was at this moment that Vanessa, full of joy, came to them, and with passion promised to help Elga to choose the outfit. In her gaze, genuine enthusiasm and care were felt. Elsa, feeling the support of her girlfriend, sincerely thanked her. They leaned closer to each other, quietly discussing the details, and Ralph watched them with hope, hoping that Vanessa would help to find Elga an ideal option. Meanwhile, in the estate, the mysterious figure listened closely to the words of Tentley Toria, who reported to him the latest news. Tentley, in a calm, confident voice, reported that Bernard's group had gone to the dungeon. Hearing this news, the mysterious figure barely smiled. In her eyes, a fire broke out. He thought of the possible consequences of this trip, well understanding. The dungeon conceals not only serious dangers, but also incredible treasures and strength for those who dare to dive into his darkness. Clear forest clearings, surrounded by thick trees, securely hid a noble deer that calmly grazed, enjoying every juicy grass. However, suddenly his vigilant hearing captured a sharp sound that broke a calm silence. The deer stopped instantly, alertly spreading his ears and widely opening his eyes from fear, and after a moment, overcoming the fright, with the rapid vortex rushed to flee, overcoming all the obstacles in his path. Meanwhile, the heavy wheels of a giant carriage that reached the size of the whole train loudly roared and creaked on a rocky road, lifting behind the clouds of dust. Despite the splendor of a dark tree carriage, decorated with exquisite ornaments, the whole company Bernard gathered together. Admiring the grandeur and luxury of the carriage, she could not restrain the enthusiastic exclamation, noting what creation is a real miracle. Ralph, her constant friend and satellite, answered it with a wide smile. She barely squeezed her eyes. NASA looked at Bernard and, holding back laughter, noted that this carriage was able to rush even faster. Bernard looked at her carefully and nodded without hesitation. In a moment, as if executing an invisible order, the carriage suddenly gained speed, perturbing a long loop of dust. She moved rapidly, heading towards her goal, a mysterious and dangerous dungeon hidden in the heart of the forest. The caravan, which was called the Purple Path, impressed the imagination as a true work of engineering. Its design harmoniously combined the sophistication of forms with practicality. Passengers, he probably explained that the secret of smooth movement lies in unusually wide wheels, because they guarantee stability and ease of control. At the same time, the trolley was amazing ease, because it was used to create mithril, extremely rare and valuable metal, for which whole wealth went. Vanessa, without losing her sarcasm, only rolled her eyes and said with a smile that this purchase was even more expensive than the mentioned wealth. Taking advantage of the right opportunity, Vanessa proudly noticed that she was greeted by the interior design. She emphasized that the comfort of living space is no less important than the maneuverability of the carriage itself, especially when it comes to the long road. It was the feeling of convenience that awakened in Ralph the thought that immediately came to his liking. His companions suggested raising a little money and buying the same carriage to equip a cozy house for their wolf, Rice. Fascinated by this idea, Ralph began to seriously weigh further opportunities. He is in the imagination, where they and Elsa travel in a small trolley, tasting every common moment. It is this thought that looks extremely attractive and romance. Suddenly, Elsa noticed that they were already approaching the dungeon, and her excitement was immediately transferred to Ralph. Having realized the threat, they all shouted to Bernard, demanding to stop the carriage. Bernard has taken all his strength, tightening each muscle, and tried to stop the powerful horses, leaving bloody traces behind. Four slowly left the carriage, as if trying to keep a moment of rest as long as possible before testing. They stopped at the edge of the forest lawn, where the juicy green carpet of grass gradually replaced the dark, plowed earth. A reminder of Einar, staying a little behind, whispered quietly that after long searches and failures, they still managed to find a new dungeon. His eyes glowed with admiration, and his hands were barely noticeable to excite. Vanessa, paying attention to this reaction, did not refrain from remark. She noted that Einar was really extremely excited. Understanding the need for thorough preparation, Bernard suggested that Rovalfu strengthen the ability to regenerate to be prepared for any surprise. Rolf immediately accepted this advice, because he realized that every advanced skill can play a crucial role in the coming campaign. Meanwhile, Elsa stood near the tubs, crowded with magical crystals, and thoughtfully evaluated how much effort and resources Bernard put in their purchase. Realizing that these crystals can become the key to their success, she decided to act immediately. Focusing, Elsa began to turn crystals in turn, releasing every mighty magical energy from each. Every time Elsa destroyed the crystal, the waves of energy diverged from it, filling the space with a flickering magical light. Ralph absorbed this energy in himself and felt with enthusiasm as his forces were growing steadily. Suddenly, the system announced that its regeneration skill has reached the 10th level, and at the same time a new skill was discovered: the choice of quantity. Noticing an unexpected change in his behavior, he wondered what had happened. Ralph replied that he now shows the number of supersaturation that appears over crystals, opening up new opportunities. Initially, a unit appeared over the container with crystals, and soon the figure changed to a 2. Stunned by the new discovery, they suggested that Ralphov try to absorb several crystals at once to find out where the boundary of his unusual abilities passes. Ralph focused. At the same moment, the crystals suddenly shuddered and aimed at him as if obeying his will. Everyone who witnessed this scene was stunned by what they saw. Elsa, without hesitation for a moment, destroyed each of the crystals and released even more powerful energy. His strength has increased at times, and he realized that the skill gained allows you to absorb several crystals at the same time. Bernard, watching it, quickly realized such discovery can radically change the course of events. Studying the data of the system, he noted that the limit probably was 172. Even the system did not exceed this number. When the system was interested in Ralph, whether he wanted to absorb 172 crystals, he, fully aware of the importance of this decision, agreed. The crystals, as if obeying invisible magic, suddenly grabbed the barrel and rushed to Elsa, turning into a crazy swirl. Ralph immediately saw the danger and shouted, trying to warn it. Elsa, without losing moments, began to scatter crystals with her magic. One by one, a wave of her strength broke them into tiny fragments, which, having disappeared in the air, left only a thin mark of magic energy. This energy was twisted around Ralph, penetrating into his body and filling it with amazing force. Suddenly, Ralph engulfed unbearable pain, and he shouted loudly. His cry fled the forest silence, and his eyes were widely revealed from horror and suffering. The next moment, it falls to the ground, and a panic is immediately raised around. Everyone rushes to him, full of confusion and anxiety, trying to help. Bernard, seeing Ralph in suffering, exclaims to Vanessa, begging her to use healing magic. Vanessa runs to Ralph without delay, and her hands begin to glow with a soft glow. Gradually recovering, he said that when the crystals began to absorb, he turned to incredible suffering for him. Thousands of hot needles seemed to penetrate every cell of his body. At the same moment, the system reported that the crystal absorption limit was already exhausted. He immediately conveyed this news to others, and Bernard, confused, only raised his eyebrows. NASA explained that magical crystals contain concentrated, pure magical energy, and excessive absorption can lead to serious changes in the human body. Ralph agreed with this remark, nodding to confirm her words. She ran to Ralph and hugged him firmly without hiding her deep excitement. Openly confessing in her fears, she shared everything that her soul was depressing. Ralph gently reassured her, assuring that he has now come to an end and worry anymore. One of them smiled lightly and suggested to list the rest of the crystals to find out how much it could be absorbed. Vanessa, having assumed the duties of the accountant, carefully calculated the crystals and reported that there were 2,700 left. Bernard fell and noted that in order to avoid recurrent pain and exhaustion, Ralphus is safe to absorb no more than 299 crystals a day. The awareness of this truth has revealed a simple pattern before it. It will take 9 days to finalize the rest of the crystals. Bernard persistently argued that Ralph should definitely strengthen his skills before the dungeons, which of course required both time and considerable effort. For Ralph, it seemed like an almost insurmountable test. He was painful to think of the lost time and not used opportunities. However, Bernard, finding himself a real leader, reminded everyone that the main goal of the leader was to take care of the health and safety of his comrades. He suggested using this time for persistent training to get ready for future tests in the dungeon. Hard solemnly announced that they will start intensive training from the next day. In his voice there was an unwavering confidence, like a commander who prepares his warriors for a decisive battle. Raoul, Finn, and Elsa, deeply aware of the importance of the task, nodded approvingly, agreeing with the proposed plan. They understood that every minute of preparation could be crucial for their future adventure. She looked into the sky and saw the sun slowly hiding behind the horizon, painting clouds in gentle golden-pink colors. Her face was illuminated by a soft flutter of the evening. Smiling, she invited everyone to dinner. The invitation was accepted with relief and gratitude. The day was saturated, and now everyone wanted to dive into the atmosphere of rest and recovery for a short time. Already with the first ray of the sun, which made its way over the camp, Ralph felt a rush of strength and the lightness of his ease. His ability to recover significantly improved, and he was determined to test his own new opportunities. In the morning, he started a training under Bernard's close eye, who set the first task before Ralph, to determine the boundaries of his updated ability. Several swords were squeezed into the ground at certain intervals. Focusing, Ralph began to show his own skill. Obeying his strength, the swords rose in the air alternately. They found out that the radius of action is about 10 steps. Vanessa, standing confidently in front of them, suggested proceeding to the next stage of workout. Behind Vanessa was a giant stone ghoul, whose mighty and harsh appearance simultaneously caused both respect and alarming fear. She suggested starting training, and a little confused Ralph with Elsa nodded in a sign of consent. The monster rushed to the male, ruthlessly thrush everything around and forcing them to move as soon as possible and more harmonious. For 10 minutes they cleverly evaded the strokes of the golem, desperately trying not to get under his devastating attacks. They watched the events. Vanessa acted cold-blooded and ruthless, making it quickly gained combat experience. Hearing this, Ness denied sharply, trying to hide her own emotions. Acknowledgements were made by Bernard, because he became a mentor for Ralph and Elsa in fencing. Together, they continuously worked out the strikes, parrots, and the tactical techniques needed to win the duel. Elsa, in addition, began classes with a bow, gradually improving the shooting technique and the speed of arrows. Thanks to several days of intense training and continuous use of the magical energy of Rolf, the 23rd level of regeneration has been reached. This stage became a clear testimony to its growth and brought him a new skill: the ability to synthesize objects. When she noticed the changes, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. Meanwhile, Ralph, remembering his own adventures, thought whether his new ability would be to combine several objects into one, creating more powerful artifacts. Always open to new experiments, he suggested that the freshness of the swords they recently purchased for training. Ralph supported this idea with genuine enthusiasm. Elsa took the case, focusedly prepared the swords for destruction, trying to each other, and even a thought to subordinate the purpose of merger. Ralph noticed a message from the system. One of the iron swords failed, and now it could be melted. He was looking forward to the transformation process. Although the result did not depend on him, Ralph still decided to try luck. In a few seconds, the synthesis ended. A new iron sword emerged in his hands. The system reported that the force of attack increased by 10 units, but the value of the sword rapidly rose to 5,000 gardens. Slowly lifting the sword, he felt a new, unknown power in the weapon. Sunlight was reflected from the metal blade, dancing on its surface and emphasizing the importance of this moment. Washing his sword, he felt the power of the body with the whole body. Each muscle tensed, full of new energy. Bernard, standing nearby, watched Ralph with delight and surprise. He did not believe. A sword created by merging became much stronger and without the blacksmith. This opened up new opportunities and prospects. Without being seen from what he saw, the news heard forced Bernard to be more involved in Ralph's skill. He thoughtfully studied the sword, thought of the possible risks, and acknowledged that he had never met the objects with +1. Even for him, an experienced master, it was undoubtedly. These weapons became much more powerful. Bernard, with a thoughtful note, noted that such things should not be sold in ordinary shops. With a serious look, he noted that objects, enhanced by magical mergers, could attract suspicion. Ralph nodded silently, understanding well, their recently acquired skills and artifacts should be kept secret in order not to evoke unnecessary interest. At that moment, Elsa, looking at Bernard, unexpectedly noticed him an extremely interesting look. His eyes were cast with a deep, unusual red tinge, which seemed full of mystery. Elsa mentally acknowledged that it could have been true. She was interested in art, and, jokingly pointing at the painted eye, she wondered whether it was meant. Therefore, she began to talk about his peculiarities with enthusiasm. Noticing that he was paid attention, the art explained that his unusual eye is endowed with a rare ability to recognize. It was because of this gift that he was able to determine the true value of things, to distinguish fakes from jewelry, and yet to anticipate the trajectory of hostile blows, which made it indispensable in battle. Bernard was surprised to hear these words, because it was because of this that the nickname of Bernard was nicknamed the nickname. Seeing Ralph's confusion, Bernard added that he began to manifest more and more unexpected abilities. Alpha accepted the proposal, although with a slight sadness he noted that his skills, despite all their uniqueness, are sometimes in vain on the battlefield. He sincerely hoped that Elsa would continue to remain nearby, because her support was a real treasure for him. Smiling, he silently thanked her. Meanwhile, as always witty and frank, she jokingly said that it was probably destined. Suddenly, she looked at Ralph, and in her gaze flashed. She delicately advised him to think about what Elsa could lead to, unambiguously hinting that he would remain helpless without her. Ralph was confused by such a perspective. The words painfully affected his vanity and undermined confidence. At that moment, Elsa could not hide her feelings. Her voice trembled from indignation when she said with determination that she would never leave Ralph. Seeing their reaction, she smiled and gently assured that she understands them, and that they would always stay together. Suddenly, Vanessa's face became serious. Turning to Ralph, she noted that they rarely stay together for a long time, and warned, one day they could break up. Ralph took her words close to her heart, realizing that life is unpredictable, and even the strongest relationships were sometimes torn. These thoughts deeply fell into his soul, forcing him to think about the future. But despite the seriousness of the moment, Vanessa soon switched attention to urgent cases. She proposed to prepare for the next stage of the exercise. Suddenly, as if by a magic wand, there were striking rows of gigantic gulls behind it. Their stone bodies were formidating in the air, giving this scene a terrible look. Vanessa announced everyone to prepare for training. They were stunned by a huge number of golettes. The unexpected invasion of such numerous opponents required an instant response. Walking away from the attacks, they hastily retreated, while the gulls relentlessly destroyed everything in their path. This situation was not at all like a simple workout. When the dust has subsided and the workout ended, they are tired, but full of new determination, returned to the camp. They again plunged into the creation of new things, working hard on improving their weapons. When the work came to an end, Bernard approached to evaluate the fruits of joint efforts. The new swords captured him with impeccable quality. They glittered in the light and radiated powerful energy. Their appearance testified to the extraordinary power that they were laid. Bernard was surprised that he had never seen so many legendary artifacts at the same time in one place. He proudly talked about his achievements, emphasizing that he improved all objects by the method of fusion regeneration. But at the same time, he acknowledged, in this process, some things were still damaged. This risk was impossible to avoid. The grueling days of continuous work and training were not in vain. Ralph absorbed all the crystals, and its level of regeneration reached the 25th mark. With each subdued level, passive skills also increased, and the system noted these successes with stars, which testified to the rarity and strength of acquired abilities. The more stars, the higher the efficiency. This was an incredible achievement for Ralph, which opened up the brand new horizons of strength and opportunities. At first, holding a sword in his hands, he was surprised to realize that he was holding a real legendary weapon. His imagination was painted by the images of blacksmiths, which spent decades to create such masterpieces, while Ralph himself made it in just a few minutes. He realized that the mass sale of such swords can lead to market saturation and fall in prices. Therefore, he first approached the massive stone column and tied it with a reliable rope. Then, he turned to the team, explaining that everyone should fix the rope on themselves. It was a safety measure. If someone gets lost or struck in the flooded part of the dungeon, the rope will serve as their thread Ariadne. It will help to find the way back even in complete darkness and water. Understanding in what direction Bernard thinks, the NASA representative explained that the excess product on the market can lead to a decrease in its value. After reflection, Bernard expressed an offer to sell swords in armed shops, because it is always where there is high demand, so there are no problems with implementation. Realizing that an unknown dungeon, filled with traps and formidable monsters, was waiting for them, Bernard ordered everyone to prepare weapons. He recalled that they are waiting for a strict test, which is well known, so everyone should be as careful and ready as possible. Finally, the whole team was armed for teeth and completely prepared for a future adventure. Ralph, on the move, approached the armor, approached Elsa, and wondered if she was ready to go. Elsa stood in combat armor, concentrated and full of confidence. In her eyes, the determination and shadow of despair were combined. Although the breastplate was slightly open, it looked unbreakable. Ralph, with a note of anxiety, asked if her armor was not too open, but Elsa only looked at him in surprise without understanding the causes of his excitement. When Vanessa approached the company, a smile appeared on her face. She was enthusiastically noted that everyone looks great and ready for any challenges that are waiting for them in front. Meanwhile, Bernard, checking the weapon, looked carefully at everyone and asked if everyone was ready. At that moment, Ralph was engulfed by a sudden wave of anger. They moved to the entrance to the dungeon together, and each step of them diverged in the silence of the forest. Despite the confidence that she was felt in everyone, the elusive excitement was in the heart of each of them. Going down the stairs, they shared the last tips, constantly reminding each other about the need to be as careful as possible. In their assembled faces, deep cohesion and adamant belief in success, which united everyone, read. At the same time, no one suspected that, at this moment, in the shade, carefully hidden from prying eyes, the figures were strenuously observed at each disturbance. In their hands, the daggers were dimly gleaming, ready to snatch at any moment and strike a sudden blow. She carefully descended the hanging stairs leading deep into the dungeon. With each step, the stairs were given a characteristic creaking, and the light of the torch, which Bernard kept below, flicker, and rejected bizarre shadows on the stone walls. The air was noticeably cold, and became more wet as it was moving further. Finally, Elsa reached the bottom and stepped on the cold stone floor of the dungeon. She looked back on Ralph, and with anxiety in her voice asked him to be careful. Ralph descended the ladder, confidently, though with all the necessary care. Bernard, carefully holding the torch to disperse the darkness in the shaded corners, suggested that the study began. The group moved forward, plunging into an endless maze of underground moves. The group moved forward, listening hard to each rustle around. The shadows from the flickering torch slid on the walls, forcing ancient characters and runes to come to life in a ghostly dance. The air was saturated with the smell of dampness and onsai. They were slowly approaching a certain place. Suddenly their steps died down, dissolving in the soft splash of water. A flooded passage opened in front. A dark, opaque water blocked the path, as if hidden behind a fragile glass curtain. Carefully inspecting the flooded passage ahead, he took a deep breath and firmly stated that they needed to overcome this water, absorbed by the dungeons in order to continue their journey. His voice remained a confident and determination, though the obstacle seemed almost irresistible. Bernard watched Vanessa focused, clamping her eyes, and asked, "Let her use a spell that allows you to breathe underwater." Vanessa nodded without hesitation, lifted her sophisticated rod, and closing her eyes, completely focused on the swing. Saying magical words calmly and measured, she soon forced the rod to light up a soft but dazzling glow. At the same moment, the whole detachment felt the charming energy envelop them from all sides, giving unknown abilities. The feelings were incomprehensible, as if their bodies were in the world, subject to other laws, and they themselves became part of this strange, almost magical reality. When the light melted, Vanessa opened her eyes and smiled. She reported that from now on, everyone was able to breathe underwater. Without losing a minute, the group boldly plunged into the cool waters of the underground lake. Elsa was delighted. She was breathing so easily and freely as if she were on land. The new feeling fascinated her, and Vanessa's charming abilities seemed a real miracle. The group was carefully moving forward with a narrow passage, where the water gently washed their bodies, giving a sense of security. The path seemed endless, but no one stopped. The vigilant Bernard noticed a small hole in the stone wall and called others to spare others. Coming out of the water, travelers were in front of the huge ancient doors. Bernard looked at them carefully and surprised that there was no lock on the door. He immediately alerted, feeling a possible trap, and called for care. He turned to all who used to rely on the intuition of Bernard. He quietly turned to Elsa, reminding her that his father always warned against such circumstances. Nessa looked at Ralph with anxiety, silently asking him not to forget to check the rope, the only way to return. Ralph only nodded and went to check the rope. However, when he already wanted to attach a rope to a reliable stone, something unusual suddenly fell into his eye. The same rope that they relied on was floating on the surface of the lake, as if someone had inadvertently left or forgot. Seeing how confused he was, the interlocutor only shook his head and asked what had happened. Ralph, meanwhile, pulled out a rope from the lake and could not believe the eyes. It turned out to be broken. Travelers with anxiety noticed that the rope they left as a landmark was broken. They were covered by panic and confusion. Ralph was most upset. After all, he was fixing the rope and was convinced of its reliability. It was at this moment that Vanessa approached Ralph. Keeping calm and confidence in the voice, she advised to look more carefully at the trimming of the rope. Standing with Rolf, she pointed to clear traces of the knife on the rope. It was not torn, but neatly cut. Thinking, the girl assumed that it was probably there that they buried the yard. Meanwhile, Ralph plunged into his own thoughts. This news has come to a new wave of anxiety among friends. No one could understand who did this and why. However, in NASA, where they always got into details and knew a lot of underground secrets, there was an alarming anticipation. She noted that if the rope was really cut, it may mean the presence of other adventurers in the dungeons. Probably one of the strangers tries to confuse their traces or obstruct on the way. The backdrop, as always collected and vigilant, immediately suspected it was not good. He realized that the ropes had been intentionally cut. Someone wanted to get lost in the maze. Despite all the circumstances, Bernard realized that it was already in vain to turn back. So he proposed to continue the movement forward, because they did not notice other passes, and therefore, could not get lost. Having examined the massive doors in search of traps and not noticed anything suspicious, Bernard warned the rest of the probable danger. The monster could well hide behind this door. Everyone was intensely prepared for possible threats, armed and alert. Bernard gently put his hand to the massive door and slowly opened them. The creaking of heavy curtains spread the dark corridors of the dungeons, forcing travelers to die in anticipation. Finally, when the door opened, a majestic stone statue, which dominated the spacious hall, appeared in front of them. The work of art radiated a long-standing power and impressed with the skill of performing the smallest details. The figure guessed the traits of a mysterious deity or warrior. Having thought about it, Hard noted in his diary that he probably liked it. Elsa's little wolf suddenly rushed to the statue, growling loudly, as if it were a true danger. Elsa, puzzled and concerned about such a reaction, felt. Elsa carefully wrapped rice, trying to comfort the wolf. However, the baby did not stop growling, inseparably looking at the stone statue. Meanwhile, Bernard carefully considered the statue itself and the surrounding space. Assuming that a trap could, returning to Elsa, who was just trying to reassure the restless rice, Neza wondered if the wolf was annoying the statue. Elsa, hugging a pet, confessed that the stone giant really causes anxiety. Nisa thought, trying to understand what caused such a reaction of the beast. Suddenly, the Russ escaped from Elsa's arms and rushed forward. The wolf rapidly rushed to leaving the room, as if the invisible force had driven him forward. Elsa, not hesitation for a moment, rushed to her pet. Rolf tried to stop it, and realizing the futility of his actions, hurried after them. She flew forward without bringing her eyes from the wolf, while the rest rushed after her, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, the girl stopped abruptly near one of the aisles that led to darkness. Rolf carefully came closer. Both lions looked in the direction of the second aisle, and Elsa had a feeling that Rissi wanted to go there. Bernard drew attention to the strip of turbid water that stretched before them. After evaluating the situation, he reassured his comrades. Thanks to their ability to breathe underwater, the team will be able to overcome this segment of the path without interruption. Without hesitation, she suggested a different kind of magic. She lifted the rod and, having led the spell, gave everyone the ability to walk on the water. Like by the magic wand, the whole group was able to step on a water surface. Carefully stepping on the water surface and feeling strange tension under their feet, they slowly moved forward with a dark corridor. In the distance, the light flashed, which filled their hearts with hope. Travelers came out of the dark corridor, and they were a picture that exceeded all their ideas. They stopped directly on the shore of Lake Van, where the endless water surface shone in the sun, reminiscent of a giant sapphire. The wolf, passionate about the feeling of freedom, broke down to the water and joyfully ran forward, leaving behind small traces on soft sand. Hardly turning their breath and looking around, they could not hide their surprise. Directly before them stretched Lake Van, holy, shrouded in legends. And that meant that the city of Agdorvan, which they heard so much, should be somewhere nearby. It was difficult for them to believe in their own luck. They stood stunned, unable to hide the admiration from what they saw. However, the insightful Levains noted that it may not be a way out of the dungeon, but on the contrary, entrance. Its assumption made the rest to stir. Soon their view stopped on an ancient tombstone nearby. The stone was thick with moss and kept traces of time. Vanessa approached and touched the rough surface, considering almost erased inscriptions made by the divine language. It seemed to her that this burial could be related to Mr. Dwyrus. It turned out that Asif Dwyus is the same god who created the world. Ralph only confirmed this assumption and said that there is another divine creature near the Dwyrus, a great beast. It is the Dwyrus that gives people their blessing. Vanessa asked Bernard to read the inscription on the tombstone, hoping that his knowledge would help to solve the riddle. Although Bernard confessed that he did not speak the divine language too well, he still came closer and tried to disassemble ancient symbols. He managed to disassemble only part of the inscription. It referred to a friend who created the world with someone. The rest of the words were so damaged that it remained unclear. After reading the inscription, Ralph expressed the assumption that he may be the grave of a friend who helped God. Bernard carefully studied the inscription and skeptically shook his head. He believed unlikely that God could have a friend in the usual sense of the word. He put forward the idea that the memorial could be devoted to both gods, but the content of the word friend remained unclear. Only Elsa, looking into the distance and barely squeezing her eyes, spoke to his comrades, asking whether they remember the room with the statue. In her voice there was a genuine surprise. She recalled that it was there that the same statue, which in her opinion, was symbolized by the virus. Divine thought moved it to where two gods could ever meet, but over time, all the memories of it dissolved in the void of oblivion. His reflections suddenly broke up Rice. She ran and wandered loudly, forcing them to pay attention. Wolf was anxious about their actions, and Elsa reflected what connection could exist between Rice and the statue of the girl they recently saw. Feeling a wave of pride, he scolded a little and acknowledged that he did not know the answers. However, he noted that it is good that they managed to learn about the trap and the secret entrance. It was here that the secret burial was indeed hidden. Travelers came to think that their unexpected find was a real gift of fate. Now that Risi finally calmed down, they were able to dive into their research again. They carefully moved the dark corridors, listening to the echo of their own steps. Bernard, attentive to the smallest details, carefully recorded everything that happened to them. The corridors stretched out without end kraya, and each of them hid their secrets. They carefully inspected each corner and turn, trying not to release any important detail. After spending a few grueling hours in search, they decided to leave the dungeon in turn, and the latter rose Ralph. Garda was looking at his records. Fortunately, they did not happen any monster, and the dungeon card was almost ready. They confidently focused on the forest clip until the entrance near Lake Van. When the work on the records was completed, he suggested that the group stop and continue the next day. Everyone supported this idea, deciding to relax and gain strength for future discoveries. However, as soon as the participants began to diverge, someone suddenly turned to Ralph. Looking at, Ralph noticed a group including Figaro, Gatto, Arya, and several guards. None of them suggested that he would face the attackers from the Golden Lion Guild. They had already had a bad glory with their boldness and arrogance. We were with anxious and wondered that they brought them to this place. Figaro replied with a mocking smile that they appeared here to explore the dungeon. His words were alarming. Monroe gladly noted that they decided to take up the case on their own, believing that Bernard's group was absolutely incapacitated. In his voice there was an undeniable demand. Their presence here is undesirable, so it is better for them to go. Instead, Figaro sharply commanded his companions to move forward, despite no dangers. He was distinguished by his viciousness. Keeping complete calm, he saved Figaro loudly on numerous narrow passages and flooded areas in the dungeon of the village. "It is easy to get lost there," Figure said in response with a mockery that they did not need someone's help. They would cope with themselves. The converters were surprised, hearing the warning of Bernard. It was difficult for them to understand why their leader was rejecting the help of help, especially since the dungeon could hide a lot of dangers. However, he stressed with dignity that they are proud golden lions who do not need support from such a weak group. Their words caused a quiet hum among the guards. Some of them first thought about the correctness of Figaro's decisions. One of the guards was unexpectedly whispered to a friend that Figaro crossed the Bernard rope. However, despite this suspicion, the group still managed to return. Frightened by the possible consequences, his friend urged not to disseminate this information aloud. Suddenly, the Bernard company rose a wave of dissatisfied whisper, which immediately alerted everyone present. It was covered with rage. He turned sharply to Figaro. In his eyes an offensive fire burned. The voice trembled from his efforts to master himself when he asked Figaro to question whether it was true. He just smiled at a surprise, as if he had not noticed anything special in his mood, and with his invisible innocence wondered what he was talking about. Figaro barely restrained his anger, and was in a step to the explosion. But Bernard, invariably calm and balanced, intervened in the conversation. He suggested that someone else could be the culprit, because in the world there are enough reckless adventurers who are capable of such actions. Listening to Bernard, the hero again the widow that he completely understood, and smiled kindly. However, a spark of distrust flashes for a moment. The bold Figaro ordered the subordinates to prepare for the dungeon's study and move forward. His self-confidence and neglect of any danger caused anxiety in others, but it was clear to everyone. To convince Figaro would not be possible to change the decision. Seeing Arya in the cap, Nasa did not restrain her smiles and reminded it loud that the task had not yet been completed. Arya only silently shook a cap even lower on her eyes and moved down. He turned away, showing his disappointment in accuracy of the golden lion. However, despite the tension, Bernard still suggested leave this incident in the past. He suggested that everyone pay attention to dinner, assuring that there were no monsters in the dungeons, and therefore the threat was not threatened. He was supported, and together everyone went to the carriage to relax and eat. Late, Elsa plunged into a soothing bath, giving warm water to wash away fatigue and dispersal the tension that has accumulated in a day. Her silence broke the unusual sound, and she was alert, turning sharply, trying to find out the cause of anxiety. She was horrified. She noticed how someone's hand touched the window. Elsa released a frightened cry. Her heart was crazy about fear. Hearing the cry, everyone who was in the living room immediately rose from their seats. Elsa, wrapped in a towel, ran to them with a face full of horror. No one could understand what had happened, but the feeling of danger covered everyone. Having realized the seriousness of the situation, everyone rushed to her into the bathroom. She brought them to the window and, barely holding back, shaking in her voice, reported that someone was outside. Through the glass, everyone saw the prints of the hand, and this caused them anxiety. Ralph and Bernard rapidly ran out, trying to find a stranger. In the distance, Ralph noticed the shadow and called Bernard, reporting that the man was already nearby. They rushed towards, feeling the hearts crazy with the influx of adrenaline. Going closer, they noticed the wounded sitting on the ground, and the blood slowly flowed from his wounds. Carefully examining the wounded, he recognized one of the soldiers of the Golden Lions. The man's face was deadly pale, and blood was oiled from his clothes, painting the earth with red spots. Ralph asked why he was here, and where other members of their group went. From his last strength, he lifted his head, predictively for help. In his look, despair and pain were reflected. The trembling hand, pointing to the dungeon, began his story about everything that had happened to him. He told how their group went down to the dungeon, hoped for a quick and successful expedition. However, barely crossing the threshold of dark corridors, everyone suddenly encountered a huge monster, which seemed to be just nowhere. A detachment of golden lions with perseverance and confidence moved to the dungeon, not knowing what danger is chatting in front. The mysterious figure, previously noticed by Bernard and his companions, suddenly came to life. The stone eyes of a giant statue seemed to have lived, and stubbornly, hardly the chariot moved from the place. Like the golden lions covered with horror, hastily rushed from the stone stand, desperately trying to catch up with us. Their snakes instantly released fire, and the burning tongues of the flames swept the narrow corridors, destroying everything that happened on the way. The hero engulfed the surprise from the chaos that unfolded around him. The Arya leaned to Gato and whispered that time to go. Not wanting to put themselves in danger for the sake of meaningless risk, they hurriedly went away. Figaro noticed their escape and exclaimed in confusion, not understanding where they were going. Sawing his shoulder glance, she exclaimed that this night's horror was a consequence of his own actions. Gato, without stopping in the escape, thanked for a generous reward, but immediately noted that he did not intend to risk his life for him. The warrior stated that the agreement between them was no longer valid, which caused the wave of rage. She promised to take revenge with threat. Dite only smiled ironically and wished her good luck, perfectly realizing that she has almost no chance of winning. The monster, roaring from the rage, rushed to Gadit. His massive paws were hit on the wall, as if a ram, breaking stones into wreckage and forcing him to pour down. You should never use the thunder from the heaven against Gato. It is capable of knocking it out of balance and causing a fall. Arya, who ran in front, suddenly felt a weak discharge, stopped and looked around when Gato's screams flew to her hearing. Her eyes flashed for a moment, but she quickly took her hands and with the help of magic brought an icy wall to protect his friend from attacks by the Moonska. However, the icy curtain could not restrain the monster's offensive. The monster, falling from the rage, escaped through the curtain and rapidly attacked the Arya. He struck her with such a frantic force that the girl immediately lost consciousness and was unconscious on earth. Her body remained stationary. It seemed that she was no longer breathing. Soon, the insurance, covered by the rage, stopped Figaro and pressed him to the ground with a heavy paw. Figaro shuddered with fear. It seemed to him that life was slowly leaving his body. Ralph, like a ghost, rushed to Ugart. Having collected all his strength and determination, he deeply stuck the sword in Popmonyavskaya. Retreating with a fierce roar, the monster finally gave Figaro the opportunity to take a deep breath on full breasts. He was genuinely surprised that Ralph had rushed to his aid, despite all their previous differences. Bernard, along with his group, hurried to help. With anxiety, he reported that one of the people Figaro told them about all the events that happened in the dungeon. Meanwhile, there was an unwavering determination that they were ready to save Figaro, but they would require considerable remuneration. Their words sounded confidently and firmly. After evaluating the situation, Figaro ordered to hide where you could avoid danger and not interfere with the battle. Full of determination and anger, he loudly stated that he did not intend to retreat, as this could be threatened by Vanessa and Elga. The monster came again. The stone snake produced a flame and a poisonous fog, filling the dungeons with suffocating vapors. They quickly realized that they needed to protect themselves from the poisonous fog and suggested using magic to create a water shell. Nessa agreed and, focusing, began to cause a transfused water protection. Understanding all the danger of the situation, Innard loudly stated that he would distract the monster, as Vanessa with Elsa would attack him. Meanwhile, Ralph had to take care of the safety of the whole group. Bernard rushed forward, deliberately inciting the monster to take him to the site. The rest of the event suited, so they moved to the action without delay. At this time, Ralph watched Bernard with enthusiasm, not hiding his surprise about his skill. Bernard was moving lightning, demonstrating amazing speed and agility, skillfully avoiding the monster's attacks. He struck quickly and accurately, and even Bernard himself realized that he barely had time to dodge the monster. Bernard, keeping a close eye on the development of events, gradually realized the monster did not use all his strength. His blows were accurate but not deadly, as if the creature was satisfied in fear and powerless travelers. It was not just about. When Nessa saw in what condition Bernard was, she immediately realized that she could not be delayed. Having collected all her magical power, she raised a tall, icy wall, which fenced off the monster from Bernard. To the surprise of Nisia herself, the monster suddenly turned out to be so unrestrained that it crashed into the created obstacle. Vanessa and Vanessa were caught by each other. They both understood that it is impossible to hesitate. It is time to act quickly and confidently. Bernard, noticing their indecision, hurried to assure that the idea was really wonderful. The next moment the monster roared with a new fury. It turned out that he managed to destroy the icy barriers with his fiery breath, and now finally released. Finally, feeling the danger increased, he loudly stated that he would become a bait, and instructed Ralph to distract the monster from the rest. Ralph, squeezing the sword with all determination, assured Bernard that he could rely on him. Hearing these words, Bernard confidently stood before the monster, squeezing the sword firmly in his hands. A giant shadow grew in front of him, but the guy still could not see who or what this creature was. However, he was certain in only one thing. Now you cannot afford fear. In front of him was an adventure seeker, in the hand of which was a legendary sword, a family relic, which has long been passed down from generation to generation. Ralph was alert when the monster pushed his paw on him. He managed to put a shield. The blow was extremely powerful. At that moment, Ralph realized that if it were not for the legendary shield, his life could have already been broken. In a moment, the monster threw out the flow of flames right towards Ralph. He froze in horror when he felt an unbearable heat and fell to the ground. But despite the burning tongues of the fire, he was able to get up. It did not stop the monster. Already in the next moment the sword was hanging over them, and the massive wing cut the air. In the very heart of the monster trap, something was ominous, hinting at the hidden threat. In the dull ambush of the monster, light suddenly broke out. The anxiety-covered art exclaimed to Ralph, urging him to retreat, because he felt something horrible was approaching. In his imagination, spooky paintings were raging. He saw himself and Elsa in slavery, forced to obey the ruthless gentleman who could. Seeing that Ralph was not going to give up, Bernard felt that the monster was about to take the attack again. It was then that the frightened and excited Elsa exclaimed, trying to warn Ralph about the danger. But he did not have time to react. The creature, having issued a spooky rick, threw out huge tongues of fire against him. The flames rushed forward with such a frantic speed and force that seemed to be about to absorb everything around. Keeping cold-blooded, Ralph raised the shield, hoping that he would be able to save him from the passionate element. At that moment, the shield remained his only protection. The flame raged with such force that the shield in the hands of Ralph was covered with smoke, and the piercing heat burned his palm. The pain seemed unbearable, but he just clapped his teeth and stubbornly held the shield, protecting his comrades. Noticing that Ralph was about to weaken, she decisively exclaimed that he would not allow the monster to win. Quickly removing the bow from her shoulder, the girl pulled the bowstring and brought the arrows directly to the monster. The moment passed, and 2 arrows with a whistle cut the air, accurately hit the monster in the eyes. It was imbued with acute pain. He extracted a piercing roar, and his massive body shuddered. The boss gathered all the forces in one blow, after which she sharply bounced back and fell to the ground. The blinded and angry monster began to die. Embarrassed in rage, he rushed around, burning everything that happened in his path, flame-breathing. Collecting the remnants of strength despite the pain, he hurried to Elsa to make sure that nothing had happened to her. Her face was pale, and her arms trembled with tension, but she only nodded silently, making it clear, ready to fight further. After casting a quick look at the monster, he instantly appreciated the situation and commanded everyone to focus the attacks on the wings of the monster. At the same time, he urged Vanessa to support the detachment. According to the plan, he encouraged Elsa, loudly noting that she had a great deal with her task. Over the moment, Vanessa said the swallowing wind blade, and dozens of shimmering in the darkness of the dungeons of magical blades flew rapidly towards the monster. The magical blades stitched the wings of the monster, leaving behind the torn holes. Having lost the ability to fly, he sharply moved down. Flying closer to the ground, the monster widely opened his giant mouth, preparing for another devastating blow. Watching the monster, he felt that the flame would be about to escape from his mouth. At the same time, the guy clearly understood to retreat nowhere. And nearby, embarrassed by despair, Elsa begged him to flee, begging to save herself. In his eyes, he buried unbreakable determination when he stated that he would never allow himself such an act. He was amazed at his courage, and the next moment Ralph, without hesitation for a moment, rushed directly at the monster. Ralph, with lightning speed and determination, rushed forward, as if turning his sword into a sharp spear, directed simply into the monster's mouth. His legs almost did not touch the ground, namely the air seemed to drive him to the target. Already in the next moment, Ralph, with all the focus and force, directs the sword simply into the mounted mouth of the monster. The blade pierces the body of the enemy to the depth, leaving him nor than the slightest hope for salvation. The predator shuddered, and then became completely defenseless. Hardly heard, Ralph opened the lid, and frozen, stunned by an unexpected sight. The monster erupted the last desperate roar, which rolled up with the echo through all the dungeons, after which it fell hard to the ground. His enormous body fell with a roar, lifting a cloud of dust and scattering small stones all the way. Standing next to his fallen enemy, he was breathing in a fragmentary, slowly realizing that he had made seemingly impossible. When adrenaline began to weather from the body, he was replaced by deep fatigue and exhaustion. Looking at, he wanted to make sure that everything happened by design, but there was no time left. Elsa, full of joy and relief, ran to him, hugged as if she did not want to let go, and exclaimed that he was not just a good guy, but a real hero who was doing his business brilliantly. All present, together with Bernard, Vanessa, and a detachment of golden lions, froze in full surprise. They did not believe their own eyes, watching Ralph won such a powerful monster. Silently, but unambiguously, everyone recognized his feat. Suddenly, something unexpected broke their joy of victory. The body of the monster moved, and his eyes slowly opened again. Like a phylum emerging from the ashes, the monster suddenly appeared before them, as if there were no previous defeats. His rage and unbreakable determination remained unchanged, and he again rushed. Realizing that the monster had not yet died, he felt a cold sweat covering his back. Again, he was in front of him, an enemy who could not be destroyed. The creature made spooky sounds, while its wounds were gradually tightened. The monster was over again, and his fierce roar filled the dungeon with a formidable echo, from which the walls shuddered and crumbled with small stones. Wilson and Ralph were horrified and surprised when they realized, despite all their efforts, the monster did not even think to retreat. Vanessa halted the staff so much that her fingers were whitewashed, and in her eyes the gloomy glare flashed in her eyes. Such stubbornness and power of the monster seemed almost supernatural. Bernard, understanding the deadly danger and futility of further attacks, immediately ordered to retreat. He hoped that thanks to regroup, he would be able to save his life and invent a new plan. In her eyes, she raged fury when she exclaimed, "Which she has been disrespectful to the stubborn monsters." Having waved the rod, she called on the spell of zonal pressure, directing a powerful flow of magical energy into the air. A huge magic shield appeared above the monster, which pressed him with incredible force, like an invisible hand of a giant. Seeing how the spell was acting, say the words of approval to Vanessa, emphasizing that now the monster is deprived of moving. The joy was short-lived. The monster, having groaned as an angry deity, with a frantic force repelled the attack of Vanessa. It punched the magic barrier, and the fragments of the enchanted energy flew to the dungeons. The monster again rolled on the offensive. His dark eyes flashed the restless rage and hatred. But Vanessa retained her and warned everyone of the need for caution. Her voice confidently cut the tense silence. She waved with a staff, and a shield broke out before her. The monster crashed into his massive head. The air was struck from the hole, blowing blow, spreading the echo far away. Seeing that the situation is increasing and there is almost no time left, he rushed to Elsa rapidly, with excitement in his voice, asking if everything was fine with her. Elsa barely forced herself to nod, trying to seem confident, but her gaze reflected fear and anxiety. At that moment, Ralph noted on the ground a bloody spot, and his heart squeezed with horror. Bernard flowed blood. His wounds were deep and threatening. Laid, holding him, wondered with anxiety why he risked his life for her. In her eyes there were tears. Grasping from the lack of air, he looked at Ralph. His view was filled with suffering and relentless will. He was barely audible, whispering that Ralph should now take on the role of the leader of their group and accept this difficult burden. He immediately ordered everyone out of the dungeon, realizing that their chances of surviving quickly melting. Watching the monsters approaching, Bernard noted that in their current state, they are unlikely to be able to cope with this danger. He was barely audible that if they stay, they would die together. His voice was interrupted from coughing attacks, and his body shuddered with pain. The hatch with despair in his gaze turned to Vanessa, reminding her of her gift of healing and hoping that she was able to save Bernard. Ralph was ordered to retreat because the situation was becoming more dangerous. Vanessa, full of hope, turned to Bernard and warned that she needed a little time to be healing. On the screen, he again flashed an episode in which the main character insisted that she stopped, but Vanessa only calmly assured him to trust her. She drew attention to Ralph, noting his unbreakable determination. Despite fear and pain, his face remained focused, and confidence was read in his gaze. After thinking, he finally realized that in Ralph he saw a real adventurer capable of leading them to victory and ensuring survival. Ralph's sister was still roaring, and her deafening voice sounded in the dungeon, echoing from the stone walls. Ralph stood in opposite, unbreakable and collected, the embodiment of focus and determination. The monster's eyes were burning fury. It was, grasping his teeth, he dug on the monster, and his sword shone in the dim light of the dungeon. With incredible speed and force, he struck, cutting off one of the paws. A dense black river flowed from the wounded limb, spilling on stone slabs under your feet. But in a moment, under the eyes of Ralph Lapp began to grow, and the guy, fascinatingly watching it, could not believe in his own vision. The wound was tightened, and the limb returned to its place, as if nothing happened. Standing nearby, she stared at the monster, trying to find his weakest place. Its bow was pulled to the limit. The muscles trembled from tension. Feeling the power of the bowstrings pierce the whole body, she was preparing to let the deadly arrow. At that moment, the monster noticed her and moved forward. But Ralph Curler, weeded in pain, the monster began to rush madly. His movements became less controlled. Eventually, covered with unrestrained rage, he rushed directly on Elsa. Seeing the danger, Ralph hastily lifted the shield, and the monster crashed into it from all its scope, lifting around a deafening roar. The power of the impact was so devastating that cracks cracked on the shield. Ralph was aware that the protection would not withstand long, but still remained unbreakable, protecting Elsa. It seemed that the situation was becoming more tense. She ordered Ralph to stay still and decisively step forward. Ralph did not understand what she intended to do, and anxiety covered his heart. In a desperate impulse to change the course of the Thor's events, she pulled gloves and loud, filled with determination, said in the dungeon. She stated that with the help of her abilities, would destroy the barrier that defended the monster. He stood in confusion, not imagining what to expect from her, but the belief in her power restrained him from any objections. After focusing all her magic, she raised her hands, and in her eyes anger and unbreakable determination broke out. She put her hands on the creature, and from her palms a powerful energy that penetrated through his body. His massive body is covered with cracks and begins to crumble under the pressure of its invisible force. Standing in front of the monster, he exclaimed with joy. Relief overwhelmed him, because the victory was already in their hands. His face glowed with a triumph, and everything around said, "The battle is over." But suddenly Elsa, still difficult to breathe, suddenly and sharply. She was approaching the monster with a confident step. Although her figure had already felt fatigue, she reached out to the monster's mouth. Her fingers glowed with bright magical energy. After concentrating, she concentrated all her power in the place of touch, seeking to destroy the internal structure of the monster. Noticing her efforts, someone suddenly exclaimed that they succeeded, full of hope that it was a final victory. With a breath, they watched how the monster gradually crumbles. A huge body cracks and slowly disappears into the air, dissolving without any trace. The hunt knocked them sideways, and together they spilled over the stone floor of the dungeon. Elsa, extremely exhausted after experienced tension, tried to come to her senses. Her breath was intermittent, and her arms trembled constantly against fatigue. The instantaneous sense of happiness was broken by horror. All parts of the monster began to gather, as if someone's invisible hands were carefully folded by a broken puzzle. The monster regenerated at incredible speed, and none of their attacks seemed to harm him. Elzena's skill was powerless. Then Ralph noted something unusual. A strange glow came out of his head, when Ralph realized that a magical jewelry was hidden in the skull itself, which gave the monster the ability to recover. A new hope broke out in his soul. This discovery was the impetus for him to be a bold action plan. The memory of Ralph erupted memories of his father, his courage and indomitability. Before the inner glance, the image of a father, which is boldly standing on the battlefield, was put, and this picture filled Ralph with new strength and determination. At that moment, Ralph's determination was finally ripe. He raised the sword, and in his eyes the fire of rage and unwavering will fire. Without hesitation, Ralph rushed forward, at amazing speed, shortening the distance to the monster. Each step was confident and unmistakably accurate. He jumped out of acceleration, directing the sword to the head of the monster and seeking to impress the place where the magic stone was hidden. The blade with a whistle cut the monster's skin and deeply immersed in his skull. Suddenly, a systematic message appeared before Ralph, as if lowered from the sky. It suggested improving his blade. Surprised, the guy did not understand where the proposal came from and why right now. However, there was no time for reflection. It agreed, and the process of updating the weapon began immediately. The bright light shone on his hands, gradually changing the shape and structure of the sword. The magical energy enveloped the blade, and Ralph immediately felt a new force was pouring into the weapon. In a few seconds, a new spell was applied on the blade. Anna ran to Ralph, her face glowed with joy and relief. She hugged him firmly, although her hands trembled with excitement and excessive emotions. Ralph, not recovering from events, did not understand the reasons for her happiness. With caution, he wondered what to do with the monster, preparing to go for action. The smile did not leave her face when she happily announced that the monster had disappeared, and Ralph won. Standing motionless, he could not believe his own ears. The heart was pounding. Gradually came to understand that the battle was behind. At that moment, Bernard ran up to them. Pride and admiration were glowing on his face. He honestly noted Ralph's courage and determination. He only nodded silently, full of emotions, and, feeling himself a hero, has not yet managed to realize the grandeur of his own act. Kumpani, gathering in the corner, watched him with surprise and delight. They still could not squeeze how Ralph, who was still considered a regular garbage, managed to overcome such a terrible monster. In their eyes glowed admiration and sincere respect. Seeing their confusion, the girl firmly ordered everyone to silence. With a confident voice, she announced that everyone was returning to the estate. Her subordinates began to depart, not recovering from the experience, and the echo of their steps diverged along the dungeon. Meanwhile, Ralph with his comrades remained, tasting in victory. Vanessa, sighing relieved, glanced at the environment. On her tired face, both exhaustion and deep pleasure were reflected. At this point, all the views turned to Rice, who noticed something on the ground. Elsa, noticing the unusual behavior of the wolf, was in surprise, trying to see what exactly attracted his attention. As she approached, she recognized the stone. It was the same one that Ralph broke up with her sword. He dimly flashed with sinister light, leaving transparent traces of magical energy. Risey, not knowing the hidden danger, grabbed a stone with sharp. He hurried to Rice. He grabbed a wolf for a bundle and desperately pleaded to spit the stone. A warning was heard through the cry. This stone cannot be eaten, otherwise Rice can turn into a monster. His heart was beaten, and the thoughts of the head were sought to save from this situation. He persistently persuaded the wolf immediately to spit out the stone, and in every word he heard panic and despair. Despite all the efforts of Ralph, Reza cheered and swallowed a stone. Everyone who was side by side was frozen in place, as if turning on a stone, and their faces froze in horror and stunning. No one imagined what to do next. The next moment from the mouth of Risi escaped a ball of steam. His eyes flashed for a moment with an unusual, almost overwhelming light. Elsa, holding her breath, watched carefully. On her face, fear and unconcealed curiosity were intertwined. His hands trembled when he released the wolf and retreated back without drawing his eyes. All present, holding their breath, looked at Rice, not imagining what would happen next. However, instead of a terrible metamorphosis, Rice just smiled widely, and his tail had fun with side to side, as if nothing had happened. The stone seemed to have any influence on him. One evening, when the sun slowly disappeared behind the horizon, pouring the outskirts of the forest with a soft glow, Elsa decided to test her gift of destruction. She directed the force on the Vanessa dress that stood nearby, and in a moment the fabric crumbled on the powder. However, at the same moment, Ralph quickly used his ability to restore, turning the dress's original. The charming energy was circulating around Vanessa, and in a moment she drew a gorgeous new dress. Her fabric sparkled, shimmering colors in the rays of the evening sun. Vanessa overwhelmed the joy. She laughed at happiness and hurried to Bernard, seeking to share her updated outfit. He looked carefully at the ancient symbols, gently leading his fingers on the engraved signs. He gently noted that these signs remind him of the ancient language of the gods, but he could not completely decipher them. However, he managed to unravel the meaning of the phrase about the ray of light in a solid darkness, and he came to the conclusion that this sword has the power to strengthen its owner significantly. Ralph wondered, and in his eyes there was a focus. Turning into art, he carefully studied the runes on Wolf's sword, and confidently argued that it was undoubtedly a divine language. In his eyes, the admiration and desire for knowledge were reflected, as if he had touched the mysteries of antiquity. With solemn confidence, he suggested that these runes have a connection with the goddess. After that, his gaze inadvertently stopped on Elga. The girl was carefully laying out a piece of meat before Rissi, preparing for dinner. Seeing a piece of meat in front of him, Rissi took a deep breath and exhaled the flames sharply. His new ability allowed to control the fire with amazing accuracy. The meat instantly turned into a mouth-watering, roasty and juicy dish. Elsa, noticing the incredible abilities of her wolf, said with surprise that it seems that their rise is gradually turning into a real monster. Both anxiety and admiration at the same time were heard in her voice. Ralph, carefully watching everything, nodded, and at the same time noted that despite new talents, Rissi remained the same gentle wolf that they loved. Vanessa, barely smiling, turned to Bernard, and noted that she seemed to be all right with Rise. Bernard, immersed in his own thoughts, flicked a little. He warned that, although this may be true, one should not forget about its demonic essence, and the Ba. She exclaimed with passionate confidence that Rice remained the same. His heart and soul had not changed. Hugging the wolf, she felt the softness of his fur and lives the warmth of the small body. Ralph invited that they were in front of them, all the same gentle Rice, whom they know and love. The baby, feeling the care and love of his friends, began to lick fur, and in his eyes, friendliness and loyalty broke out. Bernard, fascinated by this touching picture, could not hold back a smile. He realized that, despite all the changes and new forces, Rice remained simple, familiar to all wolves. Bernard's words reassured the audience, and the cozy, friendly atmosphere again enveloped the camp. The next morning, as soon as the first rays of the sun touched the horizon, the Bernard's detachment headed to the Adventurers' Guild. When they crossed the threshold of a majestic building with tall wooden ceilings and walls, decorated with trophies and colorful flags, the attention of everyone who was in the hall was instantly focused on them. In someone's views, surprise and respect were read, and the hall was quickly filled with whisper, like a wave. Ralph and Bernard were impressed with unexpected attention to themselves. When Bernard looked at Ralph, it became obvious that the audience had already heard about their adventures and achievements. Here, the traveler's noise gained strength, and in conversations the name of Ralph was increasingly sounded. They said that he had won the demon, which turned out to be unbearable even for the legendary Golden Lions. This enemy was too powerful even for them. One of the adventurers said that they were in the remote lands of eternal storms, where dangerous monsters are found. The conditions here are terrible. Nutrition is scanty, and the danger chats literally everywhere. Stunned Herd, he could not believe his own ears. It was at this moment that Guildmaster, Mr. Fran, a tall man with a wise look and a confident gait, came to them. He was genuinely rejoiced in seeing them whole and intact. The conversation began with the fact that one of the participants remembered. He heard that Figuro, along with his team, went to explore the dungeon, although no official request was received. Fran was genuinely surprised, and with a slight annoyance that Figuro was acting in spite of the rules without obtaining the permission of the guild. Bernard, nodding with understanding, agreed. Figuro really often ignores formalities, preferring an independent solution. Art took out a folder with documents and handed it to a friend. He, much interested in respect, invited him to his office for a more detailed discussion of all issues. The old office impressed with the comfort. There were massive oak shelves, which were filled with books and artifacts that kept echoes of distant eras. On the walls hung cards and drawings that depicted mythical creatures and legendary places. Bernard continued the story, specifying that the entrance to the dungeon is located near Lake Van. He described in detail how part of the rooms inside is flooded with water, which significantly complicates the study of the hiding place. Bernard drew special attention to the fact that they managed to find this place only thanks to Ralph and Elga, who found another, less obvious passage. Once Franz Geist drew attention to the illustration in one of the reports. It depicted a monster with the head of the lion, goat muzzle, snake tail, and wings. Franz stopped Bernard, showing a picture, and wondered that he was a creature. Sighing, Bernard explained that this monster had a protective magical barrier that could repel any attack. Bernard's story was gaining increasing tension. He portrayed their struggle against the beast, when every blow seemed useless, and the forces were already left. But suddenly, in his gaze, the pride and gratitude addressed to Ralph appeared. It was thanks to Ralph's unbreakable courage and determination that Bernard stressed that they finally managed to defeat the monster, despite all the difficulties. He also noted that due to many extraordinary abilities, this creature can be considered chimera, how to speak in the people, and this name is likely to remain behind it. Bren, returning to Ralph with a solemnity on his face, noted that his name should be inscribed in the book, because the opening of this creature belongs to him. Ralph, when he was in front of the head of the guild, felt excitement and easy embarrassment. To imagine only, his name would appear in the encyclopedia of monsters. It seemed incredible to him, and, at the same time, caused genuine admiration. Seeing as Ralph reacted, Guard added that after the news of the emergence of a new monster, many bold adventurers will certainly want to meet him personally. He stressed how important it is to distribute this information to all guilds to prepare adventurers for possible meetings with chimeras. Nadud suggested that Ralph's name to the encyclopedia, hoping that it would help attract the attention of his parents. He shared the history of Vading collection. They once belonged to his grandmother, and later became a gift to the newlyweds on his father and mother's wedding day. Listening to Bernard carefully, he gradually came to the conclusion that he was right. After all, his parents, known for their passion for adventure, often worked in different guilds. This mention gave him the hope that he would still be able to see them again. In his heart, warmth and determination warmed up, and deep focus appeared in his eyes. He felt clearly. A lot of trials were waiting for him, but his parents now had a special highest value for him. Already going to leave guild, Ralph and Bernard thanked Franu for his support and help. However, suddenly Franz stopped them on the doorstep, asking Bernard to linger because he had another important assignment for them. But before he had managed to explain something, a man with a confident and harsh posture approached them. Focused and decisive Diamond in simple clothing approached Ralph and Bernard. In his view, respect and perseverance were read at the same time. Easily bowing, he said that Mr. Furzin wanted to talk to them and suggested that he followed. Bernard and Ralph were looked at, barely nodded, and moved by the Diamond by a long corridor of guild. Over time, they were in the office of Mr. Forza, a simple, and at the same time, an elegant room. The room was striking in harmony. Massive bookshelves were stretched along the walls, filled with ancient folds. Trophies that told former feats decorate. He apologized for the inconvenience caused, noting that his thin son had a lot of trouble for them. His words were so honest that Bernard and Ralph, confused and impressed, did not find what to say in response. Suddenly, the door to the cabinet with noise dispersed, and the figure broke inside. A fierce and deep insult were read on his face. He approached his father and, filled with indignation, stated that they, together with Panard and Ralph, gave Kyrieres battle. In his voice was a boldness, which was combined with pride and confidence in his own abilities. Ralph noted that Gatto and Arya no longer made values for him, and hinted that the next time he would attach more worthy people. Zen, while keeping external peace, but with fire in his eyes, slowly stood from the table. His voice sounded quietly. B. In the next moment, Mr. Frazen, not raising his voice, but with unwavering determination, announced that he renounced his own son. It sounded like a thunder in the clear sky. The figure could not believe what he heard. His face faded instantly, and he stood in place, as if he were struck by lightning. He was looking for support, but in the harsh eyes of his father saw only the icon's determination. Mr. Frezan, focusing on his son, did not hide neither the fatigue nor the disappointment that was drawn on his face. He said quietly that he could still close his eyes on many things, including some of the guy's actions. But this time the events had already crossed the border and got out of control. Mr. Furson noted that Figuro is no longer able to take care of his own family and now only destroys the Furson family heritage. Hearing these words, Zero was already going to dispute, but his father's restraining gesture forced him to silence. Meanwhile, Zen was slowly approaching Ralph, and in his gaze, a real repentance was felt. Once again, he apologized for all the annoyances that his son caused Ralph. Feeling in Fortson the true sincerity, he gently replied that no apologies were needed, because it was Figaro who made him who he became. Hearing this, Figaro fell silent and, holding his breath, listened to the end. Looking at Mr. Forzenzanza in his eyes, he confidently stated that he was not accepted into the Golden Lions and kicked out of the guild, and Elsa appeared in his life, and later, Mr. Bernard. He said that all these events have led him to important meetings and changes, for which he was sincerely grateful to Figaro. His honest gratitude was a real surprise for all present. Hearing these words, the hero was deeply impressed. On his face, he flashed a whole range of emotions, from anger and despair to shame and pity. Notwithstanding the tension, he left the studio silently, rapidly raced the corridors of the mansion, and disappeared from his eyes. After his sudden escape, the space enveloped a deep, almost noticeable silence. Xen slowly approached the window, and sighing with a deep regret, he said that he appointed Figaro by his heir. In his voice, a barely hidden sadness was heard while he looked somewhere in the distance. He confessed that he was now realizing that his son is not ready to inherit the title, because it is too young and immature. In these words, the bitterness of the father's disappointment and the pain of destroyed hopes sounded hard, and Ralph were silently standing nearby, not finding words to support the old one. With their silent presence, they at least slightly facilitated the difficult for the Friesan for a minute. When he finally turned to them, he noted that he may be able to become a decent replacement of Figaro. His voice sounded confidently and even decisively, as if he was already making new plans for the future. Rosen walked to the table, pulled out a bag of money, and put it in front of Bernard and Ralph. His face became serious when he solemnly said that this money was a reward for the salvation of his son. Taking a heavy bag in his hands, Inard barely smiled and wondered if Mr. Frissen seems that the sum is too high. Friesen, answering the same friendly smile, explained that these funds are not only gratitude for salvation, but also compensation for all the inconvenience caused. He stressed that he seeks to maintain good relations with adventurers and merchants, so he considers such a gift quite justified. Feeling the attentive views of Bernard and Ralph, Rosen, with unwavering determination and frank seriousness, continued his explanation. He assured that not only money is in the bag to save his son, but also to compensate for all the difficulties that had fallen on Ralph's fate. In his voice there was a balance, but every word felt a real concern for justice. Rosen stressed that due to the unjust prosecution of Ralph, the guild debt had to be repaid. But now this debt has been finally abolished. He reported that he returned all the funds that Ralph spent on repayment of debt, thereby restoring justice. In addition, Friesen stated that Ralph's house, previously confiscated, now belongs to him. This news has brought a wave of relief and joy to anyone who was present. Pointing to a bag of money, the Friesen with a light smile noted that there was a small reward for Ralph's efforts. His words sounded respect and gratitude, emphasizing how important Ralph's help was in victory over the monster and in the rescue of others. Having realized the entire scale of good deeds, he froze for a moment, covered with a slight surprise. Casting his gaze on a bag of money, he fell silent and thought about the grandeur of what they had done for him. His eyes glowed with genuine gratitude, although the words stuck somewhere in the throat. Finally, he barely thanked Mr. Friesen. His voice trembled from excitement. This simple word contained all his sincere recognition and gratitude. Elsa was happy to run to the house that belonged to Ralph again. Entering his former home, Ralph noticed that the dwelling had been empty and needed serious repair. However, a gentle feeling of nostalgia broke out in his heart. Reese went out into the yard and asked to warn him if someone appeared nearby. The faithful wolf puppy barks loudly in response, certifying his willingness to protect the house. As soon as Ralph crossed the threshold of his room, he was engulfed by mixed feelings. On the one hand, the joy of return; on the other, a slight shame. Elsa, walking afterwards, looked around. Noticing her interested look, Ralph acknowledged that the current state of the dwelling is a little embarrassed. Ralph began to carefully scratch in the table, looking hard for something important. Elsa did not stay and asked that he was looking for it, but it did not stop him. He continued his search without being distracted for a moment. His hand hesitantly touched a small box from which he got a chain with 2 rings. Elsa looked at him with surprise. Many questions were read in her eyes. In order to keep these family relics from loss during numerous journeys, their parents decided to leave them at home, where nothing was threatened. With tenderness and deep respect in his voice, he continued his story. He confessed that shortly before his death, his grandmother handed him these rings, give them to the one whom he loved sincerely and with all his heart. Standing in front of Elsa, Raoul felt his heart crazy in his chest. He asked if she would agree to accept a ring from him. Her eyes, full of surprise and anxiety, met with his eyes. Elsa, trembling with excitement, carefully wondered if he was really confident in his choice. Ralph stood in front of Elsa, feeling the speed of his heart. The words were reluctant to burst into freedom, frozen somewhere in the throat, while the tension between them increased. Finally, he gathered with the spirit and honestly confessed. For him, Elsa is not just a friend, but a person who occupies a special place in his life. Stunned by his certificate, she gratefully accepted the ring. Her eyes glowed with excitement. When she looked at the jewelry carefully, she realized it is not just a decoration, but a symbol filled with deep meaning and history. Ralph, noticing her emotions, smiled gently, feeling true. However, in her gaze, a shadow of sadness flashed for a moment, and she barely asked how to be with this ring. She reminded again that she could not wear this ring on her fingers. Rolf, without losing rest, carefully removed it and pressed it to the chain, and then delicately put Elga decoration on his neck. She looked at him in surprise, and Ralph with a gentle smile noted that this is how the ring would remain unharmed and would be in complete safety. Amazed by his care and sincerity, she suddenly rushed to him and hugged firmly. Their views were crossed, full of feelings and tenderness, and for a moment it seemed that time was frozen. Their faces were constantly approaching each other, and Ralph felt every moment as the heartbeat was accelerating in the breast. In the view of Elsa, he clearly saw the reflection of his own feelings, which only gave a moment of even greater weight and uniqueness. The fairy tale atmosphere unexpectedly destroyed the loud barking of the Reese. Both inadvertently shuddered, broke away from reflection, and turned their gaze to the window. Bernard and Vanessa stood on the street, waving their hand kindly. Bernard asked with a friendly smile whether they were ready to go and suggested joining. Ralph and Elsa looked at and exchanged light smiles, confidently replied that they were ready to move. Despite the unexpected interruption, this moment left a pleasant feeling of intimacy in their hearts. Near Vanessa's carriage, with a sly smile, asked Ralph whether he managed to find what he came for. In response, Ralph nodded quietly, pointing to the ring on his finger and the chain with a ring that twisted on the neck of Elsa. Bernard greeted them and, joking, confessed that he would be pleased to carry such a ring. With a smile he advised to just buy himself like that caused a cheerful laughter from everyone. And then, already full of seriousness, he announced a new task. His confident, decisive voice immediately forced everyone to squeeze and listen carefully. He announced that their mission was the delivery of extremely valuable materials to the famous blacksmith in Minsk. These materials were decisive for the success of an important project. Vanessa instantly assessed the seriousness of the situation. No, the carriage wheels screamed, and the horses slowly moved from the place. Ralph looked around last, saying goodbye to his native Ogdorven, where his childhood and youth flashed. In his chest, he stressed contradictory emotions. A slight sadness about farewell to the home was intertwined with the excitement and joy of the prospect of future adventures. He faces a new future, full of strong ties with those with whom he has overcome a lot of trials together. Each of these people became much larger for him than just a fighting brother, a real friend. He solemnly stated that the forces of destruction and renaissance merged in the sixth world. She was not just a visitor. The goddess of Saskuran herself appeared to them. The legendary creature, which was made up of myths and which was afraid of generation, woke up. Everything happened on the Holy Land, where even stones and trees kept a long, standing power. In the center of the great hall, shrouded in with a glow and grandeur, a lady rushed on the throne. Her figure radiated power and wisdom. She sought to revive the monster to bring it to the end and finally destroy it. Other deities lined up on both sides of the throne hall. Among them was the goddess Eccles, the embodiment of the third world, and the goddess Axlion, the keeper of the second. Both on their faces reflected at the same time interest and anxiety, and their attentiveness did not doubt. Looking at, they both wondered whether they really ruled the powerful reconstruction here. The goddess Sasakuran, barely noticeably smiling, noted that such power was not intended for ordinary mortals, subtly hinting at the indifference of the goddess of the sixth world. Baragal was barely noticeable, and understanding broke out in her gaze. She recalled how she was seeding that she was laid by the lady of Sasakurayan on the beast, was destroyed by a blade, left in the world. Her words, filled with reproach and anxiety, forced the audience to think about what was happening in the world. Meanwhile, the goddess Saskaran, with a barely hidden sarcasm, noted that the owner of the sixth world seems to be indifferent to her own power and his responsibilities. With flames in her eyes and anger in the voice, Bargle reproached the goddess of the sixth world for her absence and inaction. She wondered with surprise whether the goddess was really clicking here, obviously not wanting to see her. It was at this moment that a figure appeared in the hall in a bright dress and with a decisive look. Smiling, she noted that the boldness of the die was definitely not borrowed. They were faced with the goddess Trucy, a lord of the sixth world. Sasakuran, not hiding a barely noticeable smile, noted that she was calling triple, and she responded to her request. Trucy was confidently approaching. Her posture testified to strength and unwavering. The goddess Ectus coldly and insightfully glanced at her, ordered to tell everyone her history. Immersed in memories, the Trucy began a story about his own past. In her memory, the times when she was the goddess of the sixth world, as well as the image of the legendary beast, who drove her into the trap and destroyed her soul. Some said she had set on the ground again to challenge the monster for the second time, but the beast brutally rejected her army. At that moment, she was seriously injured and barely stood on her feet. She explained that despite his serious condition, she had enough strength to destroy the soul of the beast. But the goddess deliberately chose another path, only seal it, giving an opportunity for a new beginning. Summer stepped on the hall. The goddess was loudly announced that Darius was on the threshold of death, and that's what made her resort to such actions. Suddenly, with fury in her voice, she stated that the goddess of war could not fall due to such minor scratches. Her determination was not in doubt. When she shouted loudly, in her voice he felt all the power of unbreakable will, and the crowd at the same moment froze in deep silence. Iris continued her speech, noting that the seal imposed on the beast and remained unfinished. Soon, she said, the legendary beast may appear again. She strongly announced that she seeks to conquer the forces of destruction and revival in order to finally destroy the seal. There was silence in the room. Her words were struck by everyone present, and on her faces reflected an alarming mixture of surprise and anxiety. Trucy strongly stated that when the monster returns, she would go back to the ground again to finally put an end to his existence. With an insightful look and voice filled with determination, she stated that the courtyard is only the deity of this world, and has no right to determine his fate. She emphasized that the courtyard on Earth would not be able to fully take advantage of her divine forces, reminding of the importance not of repeating past mistakes. In her words, there was a warning and a call at the same time, because she was deeply concerned with maintaining balance and order in the world. Iris squeezed his fists, cast a harsh glance at the fellow Cans, and quietly said that everything could have happened differently if it was not for the intervention of the woman she stubbornly called a child with a strange name. In her view, anger and determination were reflected, like a reminder of the former defeat and the unwavering desire to correct them. Curran, with a light smile on her mouth, noted that Tueris once was defeated by the legendary beast, and even she could not predict what the current confrontation would end. Her words, full of call and reminder of the past, filled the hall with intense expectations. Openly declaring her determination, she promised, if she manages to finally overcome this monster, she will inevitably return to her duties and will treat them with proper seriousness. Owarine, looking at confidence, wondered if she was confident in her own power and how ready for the test. Darius without hesitation assured that she would definitely handle it. Dasakurain, picking up every word with extreme caution, agreed to this proposal, but put forward a strict condition. If Tueris is defeated, her own world will be destroyed irreversibly. Her decisions caused a real shock among other goddesses and deep confusion. At this point, the goddess Axlian approached Ryan's garden. In her voice, there was a gentle but relentless warning. The destruction of one of the worlds can destroy the balance of all other universe. Her words were heard as a quiet request to weigh every step and act with extreme caution. Azakurine, remaining unmoved, stated that she prefers to destroy the world than to give it to the beast. However, Aslian persistently asked her to listen to the thoughts of other goddesses first, before making such a radical choice. She hit the axe with such force on the floor that the hum was rolled around the hall, after which she confidently announced that she did not recognize the defeat. Full of determination and indignation, she ordered the goddesses to remain in their places and to watch her. Instead, the goddess exploded with indignant exclamations, demanding from her restraint in statements and more respect. In the end, the shark gave its consent. She ordered Deveris to immediately inform her of any unusual phenomena or changes as they have arisen. Iris, demonstrating a complete understanding, began to move back, stepping confidently and decisively. The Curain, who watched from the chair for the Daris moving away, barely smiled noticeably. In her thoughts, questions, and alarming premonitions broke out one by one. This time, the Bernard group moved a trolley narrow, tortuous ways that ran between dense forests and luxurious flowering onions. The horses, feeling the approach of the city, accelerated the course, and the air filled the fresh aroma of young leaves and field flowers. Suddenly, Bernard, who was sitting ahead, turned to his satellites and said with a smile that they had already got their destination. Before them was a green oasis of Cambian, where magic and nature were woven into one. Each street, each building was filled with magic. In the heart of the city, a majestic tree was raised, whose branches extended to the sky like a giant hands that gently wrapped the clouds. Fascinated by what he saw, he wondered that it was a tree. Bernard, adding a notes of pride and honor in the voice, explained that before them, a tree of spirits, sacred and ancient, it is the very heart of Cambian. Interested in Herd, Elsa wondered what the peculiarity of this tree is. Bernard, slightly sighing and taking over the role of the mentor, explained that the tree is imbued with magical energy that flows in it from the root to the top. Not the whole territory of Cambian was imbued with magic, but it was this feature that made it possible to emerge here a unique ecosystem. The city was reminiscent of a living organism in which nature and magic coexisted in almost perfect harmony. Nessa, watching carefully, noted with her professional interest that the branches and leaves of this tree can become valuable magical materials. He was enthusiastically shared that each individual leaf was estimated at 10,000 goddesses, and the branch is almost 100,000. However, the root is a real rarity. If someone can get it, the price can reach 1,000,000. Heard the numbers stunned him. Only then did he truly realize the invaluable this area and its wealth. Meanwhile, the carriage moved continuously, bypassing the houses in rainbow colors and shops, where shelves were full of rare goods and amazing artifacts. Everyone who was driving in a carriage plunged into a thoughtful sadness, thinking how many more undisclosed secrets and riddles hide this world. He recalled the moment when he joined Mr. Bernard's group, realizing that it became one of the best decisions in his life. Traveling with Bernard and others opened the unprecedented worlds, which he did not even know. These amazing places inspired him, ignited a thirst for knowledge and an indomitable attraction to new adventures. When the carriage stopped and the passengers went outside, Bernard, assembled and confident, said that an important assignment was waiting for Rolf. He had to buy as many ancient things and weapons as possible. Rolf perceived this task with full seriousness, realizing that it was not only a regular purchase, it was part of a large plan, designed to strengthen their group and prepare for the upcoming trials. Sparks flashed in the eyes, and a barely noticeable smile on her lips when she noted that they should continue tense workout. Her voice sounded a half-jokingly, but under this felt unwavering determination. Aware of how seriously the words of the girlfriend were heard, she nodded with a sense of responsibility. In her eyes, she read the willingness to meet all future trials and the desire to become stronger. Rolf, mentioning previous workouts, smiled and said with a barely noticeable joke shade that Vanessa was turning into a real demon. With his father's warmth in his eyes, he watched the team closely. Make sure that all the purchases were completed and the cases were settled, he suggested, relaxing and just enjoy the beauty of the city. His voice sounded calmly and confidently, as if he trusted his ward and sincerely believed that they deserved on vacation. He proposed to explore the city, immerse himself in his atmosphere, discover his history and culture. Ralph and Elsa, exchanging joyful views, agreed with enthusiasm. When they approached the store, Raoul seemed to be repeated at first, but this time it was set up for new discoveries. Elsa noticed that Raoul wondered, and suggested to look for favorable offers together. He appreciated her initiative, and nodded in response. He asked if the old things were needed again, and Ralph confirmed. The more he could find, the better. Noting that the city is large, they came to the conclusion, there should be many things here. So they decided to start with the main street, where the largest shops are located. They slowly walked the street, enjoying the landscapes and the city, as suddenly a seductive aroma spilled in the air. Faithful comrade Bartleby did not slow down, and immediately made it clear that he fully supported such a find. She remembered how she recently noticed a shop that sold meat smoked on a cod of a spiritual tree, and suggested to taste the dish. Rolf could not give up such temptation, and willingly agreed. During the walk, Raoul enjoyed both the atmosphere and the conversation. Suddenly, he realized that they remained only together, and this thought has encouraged him to suspicion. Does it be reminiscent of a real date? It was a little worried by Raoul, but he tried in every possible way not to show his feelings. Their attention was unexpectedly attracted by the Homer and the accumulation of people nearby. Suddenly, a man swept by Ralph so rapidly that he spontaneously bounced back, feeling the heart crazy in his chest. He barely had time to see his ears protruding from the hood. This detail was sufficient to prevent any doubt. There was a feast. The adrenaline splash drowned out all the reflections for a moment, but the awareness quickly returned him to reality. Children who accumulated around the girl in the hood were worriedly whispered, and honestly discussed the incomprehensible situation. Some of them suddenly exclaimed that the girl was lost in the crowd, and called for her to look for her immediately. They looked around in the sides. They tried to find a way out of the sides. Hearing these words, Ralph raised his eyebrows with surprise and asked Elsa with a question. Elsa looked closely and understood that the soldiers persistently searched the same strange girl they have just seen. They settled at a small wooden table, where they immediately appeared with a mouth, watering meat that attracted a seductive aroma. When Ralph and his companion tasted the dish, they were captured by its taste. The meat literally melted in his mouth, and the smoky taste added unusual spiciness. Each piece reminded of the incomprehensible power of the trees of the spirits, with its oldest roots, wrapped enchantments and legends. Enjoying this meal, they forgot all their worries for a moment. A calm vacation broke a non-loud whisper at a nearby table. They discussed the appearance of another monster in the forest. The voices were becoming more loud, and Ralph listened involuntarily. People argued that this was the 15th creature noticed this year, and in their words there was an increasing anxiety. Hearing these words, the 12th leaned to Elsa and reminded her that Vanessa had previously mentioned the task of destroying monsters. He immediately realized that this was a wonderful opportunity to prove himself. Shrugged, the guy approached the people who talked about the monster and asked them to talk more about the situation. At first, EPL was alert, however. When Elsa assured that they were just admiring the adventures, their opinion changed quickly. He began to tell how about 5 years ago the city was governed by an influential players. They settled next to the Tree of the Spirits and strictly forbade anyone to approach their resources, trying to assign the magical power that the tree emitted. The man noted that now no one dares to collect neither leaves or twigs from this tree. The residents of the town said that it was because of this alarm that the monsters were increasingly daring to attack the city from the forest. The year after year, attacks became more and more frequent, leaving destruction and immersing people in constant fear. The Adventurers Guild regularly received a request to collect branches and oven leaves. It was to help fight the monsters. The interlocutor noted that all this is only rumors. The player's family allegedly secretly arranges attacks on the city, using monsters only as a cover. They say that they abduct people and send them to some mysterious camp. They, once again, asked the camp once again, and it was at this moment that a man with a black beard approached the band and urged everyone to stop the conversation immediately. A man with a beard warned that their conversation could be heard, and in this case, they would get into the camp instantly. Putting a few glasses on the table, he looked carefully and noticed how the boys were approaching. Looking closer to the guards, he recognized the coat of arms, which had previously happened to his eyes. The man explained that all the difficulties arose due to a faulty wiring. Then he suggested leaving all the conversations and just drinking to be a little distracted from heavy thoughts. Looking at everything that happened around, Elsa noted that the city was not lacking in trouble, and Ralph only nodded in response. Twilight has already fallen over the city when Ralph finished putting the last boxes in a cart. A lightweight breath escaped from his chest. Finally, this grueling and monotonous work was behind. Suddenly, Elsa admires with him delight that Vanessa and Bernard had returned. Ralph, though a little tired but satisfied, only nodded and closed the warehouse, carefully convinced that everything was securely closed. Soon the table was already covered in their cozy temporary shelter, and the room filled the appetizing aroma of food, creating an atmosphere of a real home. Looking forward to the news, everyone turned to Bernard with the question of what their group saw and whether at least something interesting managed to find out. Bernard scolded and admitted that although they could not find anything specific, they still heard a lot of alarming rumors. Putting the dishes on the table, she delicately made it clear that it was time to keep talking away and focus on dinner. She said that she had prepared something special for guests and urged everyone to enjoy the taste of her dishes. The food instantly attracted the attention of all, and the company took up the meal. But suddenly one of them was alert. His ears were hardly catching a sound. He urged everyone to silence, explaining that he was feeling someone's presence behind the walls of the building. The group was immediately alert, and the atmosphere gradually enveloped in stronger tension. Narid and Rolf, keeping weapons, wary out and carefully inspected the surroundings, looking into each shadow and the slightest corner. However, no matter how closely they looked at, no living soul could be found around. Immersed in art, somewhat relaxed and removed, it seemed that all this was just a game of imagination. But suddenly, the excited voice of Elsa came from the house. She persistently called to return them immediately. Returning, they felt their hearts crazy with anxiety. Near the house, they were met by an excited Elsa, who trembled and, pointing to the door of the warehouse, assured that someone could penetrate inside. Ravel had scared with annoyance. He was convinced that he locked up, but his confidence disappeared as soon as he saw Elsa's serious and agitated view. Carefully opening the door of the warehouse, they started inspecting the room slowly. In the dim light of the oil lamp, a picture appeared in front of them. Between the boxes, their faithful wolf of Rosie was restless. Stopping near one of the boxes, he suddenly cuddled. His vowel-sharp barking was split by all the composition, filling the space of anxiety. Bernard and Ralph were watered with a worrying look. Squeezing the sword's handle, he carefully approached the chest, in which Rice seems to have found something. Before his gaze, a completely unexpected picture appeared. In the box, curled up with a cake on a loose bed of soft cloths, a small bee scarab was quietly dozing. Her ear was barely noticeable, and her breathing remained smooth and silent. The girl slept firmly on the bed, her breathing was flat and carefree. Elsa approached the baby and sat on the edge of the bed, watching her calm and carefree sleep. Ralph stood nearby. He thought with interest who this girl was, and how she was among them. Sleeping, he wondered how she managed to get inside. Bernard, sitting by the window, suggested that the girl probably crashed through this window. It was large enough for the child to slip through him. At that moment, the girl jumped by Rissy's faithful wolf and gently spent her cheek with a warm tongue. Waking up, she felt a warm touch, and when she saw a dog, her face shone down a joyful smile. However, the joy instantly gave way to anxiety as soon as she noticed people around. Frightened, she instinctively declared them about her danger. She has quenched and showed small fangs. Ralph, trying not to scare her even more, addressed the audience. Looking in her face, he noticed that one of her hands was covered with dried blood. Carefully reaching out, she took the little hand of a girl, trying not to scare her. Seeing this, Vanessa came closer and gentle, but persistently asked for permission to look at the wound. The girl uncertainly, almost with fear, reached out. Vanessa cautiously turned her palm and saw a deep wound. She had not healed yet, and could easily become inflamed if not taken. Closing her eyes, Vanessa focused. Her rod was gently shining, filling. The girl who watched closely for all this time suddenly looked at her hand. Hanging out that the wound had disappeared, she smiled widely, and sincere gratitude broke out in her eyes. The mentor leaned to the girl and noted that although her wounds were already healed, she should still take a bath to finally cleanse. She wondered if she would not hurt. The mentor shook his head gently and assured that everything would be easy. Subsequently, Ralph approached Bernard, who stood his back, and asked if it was possible to find everything he needed. Bernard nodded and explained that children's things were really in the warehouse. Noticing the alarm on Bernard's face, he wondered what had happened. He confessed that he was not leaving an alarming anticipation. The worried Nasa loudly called Bernard from the bathroom, hardly asking immediately to approach. He, with an annoyed sigh, but without hesitation, moved to the door to find out what happened this time. After his soul, he really became a little easier, but the obsessive feeling that all this happened in vain did not let go. Looking back, he saw Vanessa an experienced braid from the long, still wet hair of the girl, and Rice is comfortable with her knees. Laughing, Vanessa noted that she seemed to find a new girlfriend. Watching them, Ralph suddenly remembered where he had seen this girl before. Ralph suddenly shuddered, recognizing in the stranger the same girl they met in the afternoon in the city. Stunned by the unexpected news, Ralph remembered how recently the girl was persecuted. Hearing this, Bernard was completely confused and looked at her with double curiosity. She tilted her head, realizing that she had to explain now. Meanwhile, Bernard insisted on finding out why it was the target for such a persecution. With a soft, soothing intonation, he convinced her that sincerity on her part would inevitably lead to a way to find a way to help. At that moment, she had a loud belly, and everyone around was surprised. In the end, the girl plunged into the atmosphere of dinner, tasting every piece with such a perseverance, as if she had not had the opportunity to eat for a long time, and at the same time she tried to behave as an obedient child. Usually, as soon as the girl quenched the famine, her eyes were irreversibly sticking to fatigue. Exhausted, she fell asleep right at the table. Then Ralph carefully and gently moved her in his arms to a room where a place to rest has already been prepared. Watching this, Bernard suggested waiting for the girl to wake up to ask her about everything that happened and decide together how to proceed. When the evening wandered the house with silence and everyone prepared for sleep, Elsa lay in bed and the girls huddled up with her. She looked at Rala and invited him to lie down. In response, Ralph only smiled, comforting comfortably on the floor. He spread the blanket and jokingly invited Rizai to join, noting that they also had their own blanket. Carefully approaching the lamp and carefully bypassing things scattered around the room, he quietly warned LA that he will now turn off the light. However, it was at this moment that she had already taken something completely different. She also looked in the other way, and saw the faithful wolf of Risa slowly approach the sleeping girl and settled nearby. On the girl's cheeks, small tears flicker, slowly flowing down and reflecting all her sorrow and anxiety. Watching this scene, she leaned quietly to the girl and wiped her tears carefully, trying not to wake up. For a moment she was thought of. How much fear and pain fell out of this little soul, if even in her dream she cries. Having handled her hand on the head of the child, the woman seemed to give her all her warmth and care. This moving moment turned Ralph involuntarily in the depths of his own memories. He remembered how difficult life became after the disappearance of parents. The dream left him. Every time it was only necessary to close his eyes, the imagination stood pits and dangers that could threaten his relatives. But the wise and gentle grandmother was constantly near. She sat quietly by the bed until he finally fell asleep. Looking at the sleeping girl, he felt the memories gradually merged with reality. Carefully came closer, taking care of not breaking her silence, and gently spent his hand through her hair, as his grandmother once did. In half a whim, he assured the girl that from now on she is not alone. They were together, and he would always protect her. But the girl only continued to breathe quietly in her dream. The Rezer lay on the bed and invited Ralph to join her again. Ralph noted that 3 on 1 bed would be too tight, but Elsa only smiled and assured that everything was in order. The reed will move, and the place would be enough for everyone. As if hearing these words, the deck happily barks, supporting Elsa's confidence. Waking up with a soft but persistent noise, he looked at his eyes and saw a girl who was playing from the reed. The wolf was joyfully tail, and the girl said with a smile what he was wonderful. Waking up, he finally told her that the wolf was called Risi. He then named his name and introduced her to the stems, which had just opened his eyes. The girl, while maintaining alertness, turned to Rice with the question of whether these people should be trusted. In response, the wolf has fun barking, as if assuring that these people could really be trusted. The girl finally calmed down and reported that she was also ready to name her name. She introduced herself as Gona. Elsa and Ralph were viewed. In their eyes reflected lightness and joy. After that, Elsa, with a calm smile, suggested that Gona have a breakdown together, but first advised her to wash and dress. Subsequently, everyone gathered at the table tasting breakfast. Ralph, meanwhile, thoughtfully stared at his plate. When the breakfast ended, everyone came out. Ralph presented Bernard and Vanessa Ivoni. The girls smiled warmly and quietly promised to remember unfamiliar names. Bernard, looking closely at the girl, carefully asked what had happened to her. A shadow had a shadow on the girl's face. She bowed and looked at her eyes, in which the pain immediately played. All present, noticing this, froze in the intense expectation of her words. Having taken a deep breath, the Ujuna finally confessed that she did not want to remember the survivor. The views of everyone who was around remained wrapped in her, feeling the burden of her unspeakable memories. Gona noted that she felt the presence of good people, and this is what gave her confidence in their willingness to help. Recovering and gathering thoughts, the girl suddenly turned to Ralph with a persistent request to bring paper and pen. He was a little embarrassed by her sharpness, but he did not get up with the answer. In a few minutes he returned, holding everything he needed. She began to draw on the paper brought, and soon a map began to appear under her hand. Bernard, looking at the picture, inadvertently thought of some divine cipher, but quickly realized, this is a rather image of the local dialect. Noticing strange symbols, you asked Bernard whether it is a divine language. The answer was surprised. It turned out that she was only partially similar. Meanwhile, the Uwan confidently and carefully removed each line, trying to reproduce the smallest details. She acknowledged that she was found under a tree. She stopped her gaze on a huge tree that stood in the middle of the city. Ralph, having learned about it, felt true astonishment and interest, because it was this tree that was considered the House of Spirits. He wondered what they were doing under the tree, and Gona began her story sadly. She explained that they were forced to work in a mine, which is just under this tree. Gona began her story, imbued with exciting memories. She portrayed life under the constant threat and fear of cruel attacks. The ruthless tormentors every day were beating, not only physical pain, but also destroyed their will, turning the existence. He continued his story, remembering how they were kept in a cage like wild animals. Strong iron lattice cut off even the slightest hope. From time to time at night, when everything was dying in silence, people appeared in black cloaks and removed one of them. The fate of these unfortunate remained unknown. None of the removed ones returned. The alarming unknown hanging over all the difficult, depressing cloud. One day, the other captives decided to come to her help. They realized that if someone does not call for salvation, everyone threatens the inevitable death. Under the cover of the night, using the blindness and negligence of the guards, they released Nail from the cage. That night was imbued with fear and despair, but the girl was able to break free. She ran through the dark forest, not imagining that she was waiting for her in front, but kept the faith that she was waiting for her fate. Her freedom was short-lived. Unkind people quickly found a trace and began persecution. She fled, exhausted and covered with fear, but she understood that she could not stop. The heart was shaky as it was hiding in the dark. And even in these terrible circumstances, she did not lose hope, constantly looking for the opportunity to escape. Everyone listened to her story, holding her breath, absorbing every detail of her suffering. Ralph perceived every word with special care. In his imagination gradually emerged a creepy picture of horror, which was hidden behind the walls under the spiritual tree. Now it became obvious to him. All the rumors that they had to be heard before were true.